In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a wealthy widow's will vanishes from a locked safe, threatening a vast inheritance. Was it stolen by the ambitious Clara, desperate to control the estate? The charming but debt-ridden Roland, hiding dark secrets, or timid Beatrice, the unexpected heir with eyes that see too much? As whispers of greed and betrayal swirl, only Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp mind and quiet wisdom, can unravel the tangled lies. But when a nervous clerk's confession cracks the case, a shadowy figure in London looms. Will Marple expose the truth before the Hargreaves' legacy is lost forever? The clock is ticking in this gripping tale of deception and discovery. Chapter 1. The disappearance. The September sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, bathing the cobbled lanes and thatched cottages in a deceptive calm. At Hargreaves Hall, the grand Georgian manor that dominated the village's northern edge, the roses were in their final bloom, their scent mingling with the tension that hung like mist. Mrs. Eleanor Hargreaves, the hall's formidable mistress, had passed away a fortnight ago, her heart giving way after a long illness. The village, accustomed to her iron rule over the estate, now buzzed with speculation about her fortune and the will that would divide it. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the chintz-covered armchair of Dolly Bantry's drawing-room, sipped her tea. With the delicate precision of one who missed nothing, Mrs. Bantry, her oldest friend in St. Mary Mead, was recounting the morning's gossip with her usual gusto. "It's the talk of the village, Jane," she said, her eyes bright with the thrill of scandal. "Eleanor's Wilgan vanished from Mr. Thorne's safe, of all places. The maid at the hall, Lily, told my cook, who told me. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, deceptively mild, flickered with interest. She set her teacup down, her thin hands folding neatly over her black silk skirt. "A missing will," she said softly, her voice carrying the faintest hint of curiosity, "is a serious matter. Mr. Thorne, you say? The solicitor from St. Albans, the very one?" Mrs. Bantry nodded, leaning forward. "A stuffy old thing, with a moustache like a walrus. Lily says he was white as a sheet when he told the family this morning. Gathered them all in the library. At the hall, Clara, Roland, Beatrice, the lot, and announced the will was nowhere to be found. Locked in his safe one day, gone the next. No sign of a break-in, either." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that suggested she was already unraveling a thread no one else had noticed. "How very curious," she murmured. "A safe is meant to be secure, is it not? And yet things do have a way of slipping through even the tightest locks. What do we know of the family, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry, delighted to have an audience as perceptive as Miss Marple, launched into details. "Clara Hargreaves, the eldest niece, is a proper dragon 40 if she's a day, and acts as if the hall is already hers. Roland, her brother, is younger, charming as the devil, but they say he's up to his ears in debt. Gambling, you know. Then there's Beatrice, their cousin, a quiet little thing, always painting or sketching. Eleanor doted on her, which Clara never liked. Oh, and the solicitor's clerk, Ernest Ridley, was there too, hovering about like a nervous cat." Miss Marple tilted her head, her white hair catching the light from the window. "A clerk," she said thoughtfully. "They see so much, don't they? All those papers, all those secrets. And the will, what do the village tongues say about its contents?" Mrs. Bantry lowered her voice, though they were quite alone. Lily overheard Clara muttering that Beatrice was to get the lion's share. Can you believe it? That mousy girl inheriting Hargreaves Hall. Clara and Roland were to get something, but not nearly as much. No wonder Clara's been snapping at everyone. Lily says the air in the hall is thick enough to cut. Miss Marple, knitting a pale pink shawl, lay untouched in her lap. Her fingers, usually busy with needles, were still, a sure sign her mind was at work. A will, she said, almost to herself, is a dangerous thing. It promises wealth, but it also breeds envy. And envy, Dolly, can make people do the most extraordinary things. She paused, then added, I think I should like to see Hargreaves Hall again. It's been some years, hasn't it? Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. Oh, Jane, you're sniffing out a mystery already. I knew you would. As it happens, I'm invited to the hall tomorrow. Tomorrow Clara asked me to tea, probably to keep up appearances. You must come with me. The family won't mind, and you'll see everything for yourself. Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes held a glint of steel. How kind of Clara, she said. Yes, I think a visit would be most instructive. People, you know, are like books. You only need to turn a few pages to understand their story. As Mrs. Bantry chattered on about the village's other scandals, Miss Marple gazed out the window, her thoughts far from the roses and the tea. A missing will, a locked safe, a family divided by greed. She had seen such patterns before. In the quiet corners of St. Mary, Mead and beyond, somewhere, she knew, was a loose thread, waiting for her to tug it free. And Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human nature, was never one to leave a thread untouched. Chapter 2. The heir's apparent library at Hargreaves Hall was a cavernous room. Its oak-panelled walls lined with leather-bound volumes that seemed to absorb the light from the tall windows. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and beeswax polish, but the atmosphere among the gathered Hargreaves family was sharper, laced with suspicion and barely concealed resentment. Miss Jane Marple, seated discreetly near a marble bust of some long-forgotten Hargreaves ancestor, observed the scene with the quiet intensity of a naturalist studying a rare species. Mrs. Bantry beside her whispered introductions as the family took their places around a mahogany table, summoned by Mr. Percival Thorne to discuss the troubling matter of the missing will. Clara Hargreaves stood at the head of the table, her posture rigid as a general's, her greying hair pulled tightly into a bun. Her dark eyes swept over the room with the proprietary air of one who considered the hall already hers. At 42, she carried herself with the unyielding certainty of a woman accustomed to command, her black morning dress accentuating her angular frame. This is an outrage, she declared, her voice cutting through the murmurs. A will does not simply vanish, Mr. Thorne. I demand to know how this could happen under your care. Mr. Thorne, seated with a ledger before him, adjusted his pince-nez and cleared his throat, his walrus moustache quivering. I assure you, Miss Hargreaves, every precaution was taken. The will was locked in my safe, as always. My clerk, Mr. Ridley, and I are the only ones with access, and I trust him implicitly. His tone was defensive, but his hands betrayed a slight tremble as he shuffled papers. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Ernest Ridley, who hovered at Thorne's elbow, a thin young man with a pallor that suggested too many hours indoors. His spectacles slipped down his nose as he handed Thorne a document, his fingers stained with ink and his eyes darting nervously about the room. He seemed to shrink under Clara's glare, and Miss Marple noted the way his shoulders hunched, as if accustomed to dodging blame. A clerk, she thought, is often overlooked, but he sees everything. Roland Hargreaves lounged in a chair near the fireplace. One leg crossed carelessly over the other, his tailored suit a touch too flashy for morning. His handsome face, framed by dark curls, wore a smile that was equal parts charm and defiance. At 30, he had the air of a man who lived on borrowed time, manned borrowed money. "Come now, Clara," he drawled, lighting a cigarette with deliberate nonchalance. "No need to badger poor Thorn. The will's bound to turn up. Perhaps Aunt Eleanor hid it for a lark." His laugh was met with a withering look from his sister. "Mind your tongue, Roland," Clara snapped. "This is no joking matter. The estate's future is at stake, and your flippancy does you no credit." Her words carried a barb, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of resentment in Roland's eyes before he masked it with another smile. In a corner, half hidden by a velvet curtain, sat Beatrice Hargreaves, the youngest of the trio. Her delicate frame was swathed in a grey dress that seemed to swallow her, and her auburn hair was pinned loosely, as if she had little care for appearances. She clutched a sketchbook, her fingers smudged with charcoal, and her wide, anxious eyes avoided the others. When Thorn mentioned her name, she flinched, as though the attention were a physical blow. "Miss Beatrice," Thorn said, "your aunt held you in high regard. The will, I believe, reflected that." His voice softened, but Clara's lips tightened into a thin line. Miss Marple, her hands folded over her reticule, watched Beatrice closely. "A quiet girl," she mused, "but quietness is not always weakness. There is something in her eye-sphere, perhaps, or knowledge." She made a mental note to speak with Beatrice alone, sensing the girl's reticence held more than shyness. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned toward Miss Marple and whispered, "What a crew. Clara's all ice, Roland's all fire, and she's like a ghost. No wonder Eleanor's were caused a stir." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind cataloguing every gesture, every glance. The family's dynamics were as clear as the lines in her knitting pattern. Clara's ambition, Roland's desperation, Beatrice's vulnerability. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the missing Will. Thorn, attempting to restore order, outlined his plan to search his office again and consult the police. "Inspector Craddock will be here tomorrow," he said. "He's a thorough man. If there's foul play, he'll uncover it." Clara snorted, Roland smirked, and Beatrice stared at her sketchbook, her pencil motionless. Ridley, meanwhile, dropped a pen, scrambling to retrieve it with an awkward flush, as the meeting dissolved into bickering. Miss Marple rose, her slight figure unassuming yet commanding attention. "Mr. Thorn," she said gently, "might I see the safe where the will was kept? I find such things fascinating." Thorn blinked, surprised, but Mrs. Bantry's enthusiastic endorsement, "Oh, Jane's terribly clever about these matters," prompted him to agree. Ridley's eyes widened briefly, and Miss Marple filed that away, too. Stepping into the hall, she paused by a portrait of Eleanor Hargreaves, her stern face gazing down. A woman like that, Miss Marple thought, would choose her heir with command her enemies with equal precision. The vanished will was no mere accident, she was certain. It was a move in a game, and the players were only just revealing their hands. Chapter 3. The solicitors safe. The morning mist clung to the lanes of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the villages, cottages, and lending an air of secrecy to the world beyond Dolly Bantry's garden gate. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl against the autumn chill, sat in the passenger seat of Mrs. Bantry's rattling Morris, her eyes bright with the quiet anticipation of a huntress. They were bound for the office of Mr. Percival Thorn, the solicitor whose announcement of a missing will had set Hargreaves Hall ablaze with suspicion. Mrs. Bantwig, gripping the steering wheel with the enthusiasm of a woman who relished a scandal, chattered about the Hargreaves family as they trundled towards St. Albans. "Clara's been telephoning everyone." "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, her voice rising over the engine's hum. "She's convinced it's a conspiracy, though whether she suspects Roland, Beatrice, or poor Mr. Thorne himself, I couldn't say. And Roland, the butcher's boy saw him at the station yesterday, looking furtive. Do you think he's planning to bolt?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, her hands folded neatly over her reticule. "People in a state of agitation, Dolly, often act against their own interests," she said. "Roland may be restless, but running would only draw attention. No, I suspect he's playing a different game. As for Clara, her energy is telling. A woman like that does not sit idly when her ambitions are threatened." Mrs. Bantry shot her a sidelong glance. "And Beatrice, she's so quiet, I half forget she's there. But Eleanor's will favoured her, didn't it? That's enough to make anyone a target." Miss Marple nodded, her pale blue eyes fixed on the passing hedgerows. "Beatrice sees more than she says," she murmured. "Timidity can be a mask, Dolly, but it's Mr. Thorne's safe that interests me today. A locked safe, undisturbed, yet empty of its most precious contents. There's a puzzle worth unravelling. The solicitor's office, a narrow Georgian building squeezed between a haberdashery and a tea-shop in St. Albans High Street, exuded the dusty respectability of its profession. Its brass plaque, polished to a gleam, bore the name Paisible Tournay, solicitor, and the windows were screened with net curtains, guarding the secrets within. Mrs. Bantry parked with a jolt, and Miss Marple alighted, her slight figure moving, with the unhurried grace of one who knew haste rarely solved mysteries. Inside, the office smelled of ink, leather, and the faint mustiness of old files. A young woman, presumably a typist, glanced up from her desk, her fingers pausing on the typewriter. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," she said, rising. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you." She led them through a narrow corridor to a heavy oak door, where Thorne himself stood, his walrus moustache drooping as if weighed down by the morning's troubles. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he greeted, his voice a blend of courtesy and strain. "I'm grateful for your interest, though I confess I'm at a loss. The police inspector Craddock, a capable man, will be here shortly, but I fear there's little to show them." He gestured to a chair for Mrs. Bantry, but Miss Marple remained standing, her eyes already roving the room. The office was a monument to order, shelves lined with legal tomes, a desk stacked with neatly labelled folders, and, against the far wall, the safe itself was squat, iron contraption with a gleaming combination dial. Its presence dominated the room, as if it were both guardian and accused. Miss Marple approached it, her head tilted like a bird studying an unfamiliar seed. "May I?" she asked, her tone so mild that Thorne hesitated only a moment before nodding. She ran a gloved finger along the safe's edge, noting its solid construction and the absence of scratches or dents. "A fine piece," she said. "Bratton and Sons, I believe. My nephew's bank has one much like it. Quite impregnable, or so they claim." Thorne puffed out his chest, a flicker of pride cutting through his anxiety. "Indeed, Miss Marple, I've used it for 20 years without incident. The combination is known only to me, and the key here." He patted his waistcoat pocket, where a faint bulge suggested the key's presence. "My clerk, Ernest Ridley, has a duplicate key for emergencies. but he's never used it without my supervision. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. Mr. Ridley, she said softly, a diligent young man, I'm sure. And where is he this morning? Thorn's moustache twitched. Running an errand in the village. He'll be back presently. A good lad, Ridley, though perhaps overly nervous. This business has shaken him. Mrs. Bantry, unable to contain herself, leaned forward. But how could the will vanish, Mr. Thorn? A safe like that doesn't open itself. Was it forced? Thorn shook his head, his jowls wobbling. No, Mrs. Bantry. The safe was locked when I checked it yesterday morning, just as I left it the night before. I opened it to retrieve the will for the family meeting, and nothing. The envelope, marked with Mrs. Hargreaves' seal, was gone. Other documents, deeds, bonds, were untouched. Miss Marple turned from the safe, her gaze sweeping the room. The window behind Thorn's desk caught her attention, its latch secure but its frame old, the wood slightly warped. Outside, a narrow alley ran alongside the building, barely visible through the net curtains. This window, she said, almost to herself, it overlooks the alley, does it not? Thorn blinked. Yes, but it's always locked, and the alley's too narrow for a ladder. Besides, the window was undisturbed. The police will confirm that. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind racing. Of course, she said. And the will's contents, Mr. Thorn. You mentioned at the hall that it favoured Miss Beatrice. Might you share a little more? It could help us understand why it was taken. Thorn hesitated, his fingers drumming. On the desk, it's irregular, Miss Marple, but given the circumstances, Mrs. Hargreaves' will was straightforward. The bulk of the estate Hargreaves Hall, its lands, and her investments went to Beatrice, her cousin's daughter. Clara and Roland were to receive fixed sums, generous but not extravagant. There were also bequests to charities and a few retainers. The will was signed 6 months ago, in my presence, with 2 witnesses, a doctor and a housekeeper. Mrs. Bantry gasped. Beatrice. That slip of a girl inheriting millions. No wonder Clara's in a state. And Roland, well, he's not the sort to take kindly to being outdone. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. Money, Dolly, brings out the truth in people, whether they wish it or not. A motive, Mr. Thorn, is like a shadow, it follows. The one who casts it. She turned back to the safe, her fingers brushing the dial. Tell me, when did you last see the will? Thorn rubbed his temples. 3 days ago, when I reviewed it to prepare for the reading. I locked it in the safe myself, as always. Ridley was here, filing papers, but he left before I did. The office was secure when I closed up. At that moment, the door creaked open, and Ernest Ridley entered, his thin frame almost swallowed by a tweed coat. His spectacles glinted as he froze, clearly startled to see visitors. Mr. Thorn, he stammered, clutching a parcel. I've got the stationery you asked for. Thorn waved him in. Good, Ridley. Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry are here about the will. They're assisting. His tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure why. Ridley's eyes darted to Miss Marple, and she noted the way his hands tightened around the parcel. Assisting, he echoed, his voice a touch too high. I don't know what I can add, ma'am. I only handle the files Mr. Thorn assigns. Miss Marple's smile was disarming, the kind that made people underestimate her. Of course, Mr. Ridley, but clerks are the backbone of an office, aren't they? You must notice so much. Tell me, were you here the night before the will was found missing? Ridley swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yes, ma'am. I was sorting deeds until about 9. The publican at the Red Lion saw me leave, he'll tell you. I locked the door behind me, as always. Mrs. Bantry raised an eyebrow. 9's rather late for a clerk, isn't it? Most young men would be at the pub by then. Ridley flushed. I take my work seriously, Mrs. Bantry. Mr. Thorne relies on me. Thorne nodded, though his expression was distracted. Ridley's conscientious. I've never had cause to doubt him. Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes never leaving Ridley's face. How admirable, she said. And the safe, Mr. Ridley, do you ever open it? Ridley's flush deepened. Only when Mr. Thorne asks. Ma'am, I have a key, but I've never used it alone. Never. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the window again. Thank you, Mr. Ridley. You've been most helpful. Her tone was so gentle that Ridley relaxed. But Mrs. Bantry, who knew her friend well, caught the glint in her eyes, a sign that Miss Marple had seen something, or suspected something that no one else had. The arrival of Inspector Craddock interrupted further questions. A sturdy man with a weathered face and a nonsense manner, he greeted Thorne with a nod and Mrs. Bantry with polite surprise. Miss Marple, he said, his tone wary, I didn't expect to see you here. Not meddling, I hope. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost musical. Dear Inspector, I'm only an old woman with a curiosity about safes. But I'm sure you'll have this sorted in no time. Craddock grunted, unconvinced, and turned to Thorne. Let's see this safe, then. And I'll need a list of everyone who's been in this office the past week. As Thorne led Craddock to the safe, Miss Marple lingered by the window, her fingers tracing the latch. The alley outside was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass. But her eyes narrowed as she noticed a drain pipe running up the wall, its brackets close to the window's edge. A small thing, she murmured, but small things matter. Mrs. Bantry, hovering nearby, whispered, What are you thinking, Jane? You've got that look. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. I'm thinking, Dolly, that a safe is only as secure as the people around it. And people, you know, are rarely what they seem. They rejoined the others as Craddock examined the safe, his fingers probing for signs of tampering. No marks, he muttered. No scratches, no dents. If someone opened this, they knew what they were doing. He glanced at Ridley, who stood by the door, shifting from foot to foot. You, Ledever, seen anyone near this safe who shouldn't be? Ridley shook his head vehemently. No, sir, never. It's just me and Mr. Thorne. Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he let it go, turning back to Thorne. I'll need to speak to the Hargreaves family and anyone else who knew about the will. This smells like an inside job. Thorne nodded, his face grey. Of course, Inspector. I'll cooperate fully. The Hargreaves are at the Hawk. Taken charge, as you might expect. Mrs. Bantry stifled a chuckle, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She had noticed a small detail on Ridley's coat, a smudge of green paint, barely visible on the cuff. It was an odd thing, out of place in the monochrome world of a solicitor's office. Paint, she thought, and not from a canvas, perhaps from a drain pipe or a window frame. She filed it away, her mind weaving connections as deftly as her knitting needles worked wool. As they prepared to leave, Miss Marple paused by Thorne's desk, her eyes catching a ledger half hidden under a pile of papers. Its cover bore the initials E.H. Eleanor Hargreaves, no doubt. A busy office, she said lightly. You must keep such meticulous records, Mr. Thorne. Thorne flushed with pride. I pride myself on it, Miss Marple. Every transaction, every letter accounted for. And yet, she said, her voice soft as a sigh, a will slips away. How very strange. Thorne's smile faltered, and Ridley, lingering by the door, dropped his parcel with a thud. Miss Marple's eyes met his for a fleeting moment, and she saw something there, fear, perhaps, or guilt. It was gone as quickly as it came, but it was enough in the car. As Mrs. Bantry drove them back to St. Mary Mead, she peppered Miss Marple with questions. What did you make of it, Jane? That safe looked solid as a rock, and Ridley, he's a nervous sort, but harmless, surely. Miss Marple gazed out at the rolling fields, her thoughts far from the scenery. Harmless, Dolly, is a word I use sparingly. A safe is a fortress, but every fortress has a gate. And gates, you know, are opened by those who hold the key, those who know where to find it. She leaned back, her mind sifting through the morning's observations, the unblemished safe, the locked window, the drain pipe, the smudge of paint. Somewhere, she knew, was the thread that would unravel the mystery. And Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human weakness, was already tugging at its edge. Chapter 4. The Clerk's Alibetha. Late September light filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead's post office, casting delicate shadows on the counter where Miss Jane Marple stood, her reticule tucked under her arm. She had come to mail a letter to her nephew, but her true purpose was to listen. The post office, with its steady stream of villagers and its garrulous postmistress, Miss Weatherby, was a wellspring of information, and Miss Marple knew that even the smallest whisper could unravel the mystery. The disappearance of Mrs. Eleanor. Hargreaves' will had set tongues wagging, and Miss Marple, with her unerring knack for sifting truth from gossip, was determined to catch every word. Miss Weatherby, a plump woman with a penchant for dramatic pauses, leaned across the counter, her eyes gleaming. It's a scandal, Miss Marple, that's what it is. A will gone missing from Mr. Thorne's safe. And that clerk of his, Ernest Ridley, marked my words. There's something queer about him. My cousin's girl, who cleans for Mrs. Thorne, says he's been acting jumpy as a cat on a hot roof. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, encouraging. Dear me, Miss Weatherby, how unsettling. Mr. Ridley does seem a diligent young man, though. Has he been in the village long? 2 years, give or take, Miss Weatherby replied, stamping Miss Marple's letter with unnecessary force. Keeps to himself, mostly. Lodges with Mrs. Pratt, over by the church. But last week, my cousin's girl saw him at the Red Lion, drinking with that Roland Hargreaves. Now, what's a clerk doing with a gentleman like that? Roland's no good. Everyone knows debt's up to his ears. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes flickered with interest, though her expression remained serene. How curious, she murmured. Young men do form unlikely friendships, don't they? And Mr. Ridley, was he seen anywhere else, perhaps the night the will went missing? Miss Weatherby's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. The thing, Miss Marple, Joe Baxter, who runs the Red Lion, swears Ridley left his office at 9 that night. Joe saw him clear as day, locking the door and heading down the high street. But Mrs. Pratt says he didn't come home till near midnight. Where was he for 3 hours? That's what I'd like to know. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail as deftly as her knitting needles worked wool. 3 hours, she said softly. Time enough for many things. Thank you, Miss Weatherby. You've been most helpful. As she stepped into the crisp air Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Ernest Ridley, a nervous clerk, a missing will, and a gap of 3 hours each was a thread in the tapestry of the Hargreaves mystery, and she was determined to follow them all. Her morning's plan was clear: a visit to Mrs. Pratt's lodging-house, where Ridley boarded, and perhaps a stroll past Thorne's office to test a theory about its accessibility. But first, she would call on Dolly Bantry, who had promised to accompany her to Hargreaves Hall that afternoon for tea with Clara Hargreaves. Clara's invitation, Miss Marple suspected, was less about hospitality than a desire to keep the village's influential busybodies under her watchful eye. At Mrs. Bantry's cottage, Miss Marple found her friend in a flurry of excitement, her cheeks flushed as she recounted the latest gossip. "Jane, you'll never believe it. My maid heard from the grocer that Ridley's been sending telegrams to London, urgent ones, too. What's a clerk need with telegrams? And Clara's been ringing up half the county, demanding action from the police. She's like a general marshalling troops." Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her hands folded over her shawl. "Clara is a woman of action, Dolly," she said. "But action without direction can be as muddling as inaction. As for Mr. Ridley, telegrams suggest urgent secrecy. We must learn more about his habits. I thought we might visit his landlady, Mrs. Pratt, before we go to the hall. She may have noticed something." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "Oh, Jane, you're sleuthing already. Of course, I'll come. Mrs. Pratt's a terrible gossip, she. Tell us everything, whether we ask or not." The walk to Mrs. Pratt's lodging-house took them through the heart of St. Mary Mead, past the church with its ancient yew tree and the butcher's shop where villagers lingered, exchanging theories about the Hargreaves affair. Mrs. Pratt's house was a tidy red brick affair, its front garden bursting with late-blooming asters. The landlady herself, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, greeted them at the door, her apron dusted with flour. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," she said, ushering them into a parlour cluttered with doilies and china figurines. "I suppose you're here about that business with the will. The whole village is talking, and my Ernest caught right in the middle." Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "We wouldn't dream of troubling you, Mrs. Pratt, but Mr. Ridley does seem to be in a difficult position. You must know him well. Having him as a lodger, is he quite reliable?" Mrs. Pratt puffed out her chest, eager to share. "Reliable enough for a young man, pays his rent on time, keeps his room tidy. But he's a queer one, Miss Marple. Always scribbling in that notebook of his, and lately he's been out later than usual. I mean, the night that Will went missing, he didn't come in till nearly midnight. Said he'd been working, but his shoes were muddy, and there's no mud in Mr. Thorne's office, is there?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her voice remained gentle. "Mud is so telling, isn't it? Did you notice anything else, Mrs. Pratt? Perhaps visitors or letters?" Mrs. Pratt leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Well, now you mention it, he had a letter from London last week, thick envelope, and once I saw him talking to Roland Hargreaves in the lane behind the house. Looked like they didn't want to be seen. I thought it odd, a clerk and a gentleman like that." Mrs. Bantry could barely contain herself. "Roland, Jane, didn't Miss Weatherby say they were at the Red Lion together? What's Ridley doing with that scoundrel?" Miss Marple's expression was serene, but her mind was racing. Young men, Dolly, often find themselves drawn to those who promise excitement or profit. "Thank you, Mrs. Pratt. You've given us much to think about." As they left, Miss Marple paused to examine the lane behind the lodging-house, a narrow strip of gravel that ran parallel to the high street. It was here, Mrs. Pratt had said, that Ridley and Roland had met. And it was here, Miss Marple noted, that the lane offered a clear view of Thorne's office across a low wall. The office's rear window, partially obscured by ivy, was just visible. Its frame painted a faded green. "A window," she murmured, "is as good as a door to someone with purpose." Their next stop was Thorne's office, though Miss Marple had no intention of entering. Instead, she led Mrs. Bantry to the alley beside the building, where the drain pipe she had noticed yesterday clung to the wall. The pipe's brackets were sturdy, close enough to the window to serve as footholds for an agile climber. Miss Marple bent down, her sharp eyes scanning the ground. There, in the damp earth, was a faint smudge of green paint, matching the window frame's hue. "How interesting," she said, straightening. "Paint travels, doesn't it, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry stared, bewildered. "Jane, you don't think Ridley climbed up there? He's such a weedy little man." Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Strength, Dolly, is not always physical. Determination can make a man do remarkable things." The afternoon found them at Hargreaves Hall, where Clara Hargreaves received them in the drawing-room with a mixture of courtesy and barely concealed impatience. The room, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished furniture, seemed to reflect Clara's own severity, every surface gleaming under her exacting eye. Beatrice was absent, sketching in the garden. But Roland lounged by the fireplace, his charm undimmed by the tension in the air. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice crisp. "I'm glad you've come, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. This business with the will is intolerable. Inspector Craddock is poking about, but he's no closer. 2 answers. I've half a mind to hire a private detective." Roland chuckled, lighting a cigarette. "Oh, Clara, let the police do their job. You'll only make enemies by stirring things up. Besides, Beatrice will turn up with the will tucked in her sketchbook, and we'll all laugh about it." Clara's eyes flashed. "Your levity is misplaced, Roland. The estate's future hangs in the balance, and you treat it like a game." Miss Marple, seated on a brocade sofa, observed the siblings with quiet intensity. "It is a serious matter. Miss Hargreaves," she said, "I was at Mr. Thorne's office yesterday, and the safe seemed most secure. Tell me, did either of you ever visit the office when the will was discussed?" Clara's lips tightened. "I called on Mr. Thorne once. Months ago, to discuss the estate's accounts. I never saw the will, nor the safe. My aunt trusted Thorne implicitly, foolishly, it seems." Roland shrugged. "I've never set foot in the place. Dusty offices aren't my style. I left all that to Aunt Eleanor and her precious Beatrice." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded over her reticule. "And Mr. Ridley, the clerk, do you know him well?" Clara's brow furrowed. "Ridley, a nervous creature, always scurrying about with papers. I barely notice him." Roland's smile was sly. "Oh, Ridley's harmless. Bit of a mouse, but he knows his place. I've seen him at the Red Lion once or twice, drowning his sorrows in ale." Mrs. Bantry pounced. "The Red Lion. Were you with him, Roland? The village says you were." Roland's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Village gossip, Mrs. Bantry, is rarely accurate. I may have shared a pint with him, but it was nothing more than that. A man can't drink alone without being suspected of something." "Can he?" Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. "A shared pint can mean many things, Mr. Hargreaves, friendship, business, or something else entirely." The conversation shifted to tea, but Miss Marple's thoughts remained on Ridley. His alibi, confirmed by the publican, placed him at the office until 9. Yet his muddy shoes and late return suggested otherwise. The green paint, the lane, the telegrams, Sol pointed to a man with secrets, and his connection to Roland, however casual it appeared, was a thread she could not ignore as they drove back to St. Mary Mead. Mrs. Bantry was bursting with questions. "Jane, do you think Ridley took the will? He's so timid, but those muddy shoes. And Roland, he's hiding something, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple gazed at the darkening fields, her mind weaving connections. Timidity, Dolly, can be a disguise, just as charm can be a weapon. Ridley's alibi is strong, but alibis, like safes, are only as secure as the truth behind them. We must watch him closely, and Roland, too. The truth, you know, is like a shadow. It follows the one who casts it, no matter how carefully they hide. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The Hargreaves. Mystery was taking shape, each clue a stitch in a pattern only she could see. Ridley's 3 hours, Roland's debts, the smudge of paint somewhere among them was the key to the vanished will, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unyielding curiosity, was determined to find it. Chapter 5. Clara's ambition. The autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops with a burnished glow that belied the chill creeping into the air. At Hargreaves Hall, the rose gardens, once Eleanor Hargreaves' pride, were beginning to fade, their petals scattering like unspoken secrets across the gravel paths. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was no less brittle, the weight of the missing will pressing on every conversation, every glance. Miss Jane Marple, invited by Clara Hargreaves for an afternoon of tea and sensible discussion, sat in the drawing-room, her slight figure almost lost in the grandeur of a backed chair. Her pale blue eyes, sharp as ever, missed nothing not. The tension in Clara's rigid posture, nor the absence of Roland and Beatrice, nor the faint tremor in the maid's hand as she poured the tea. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, ever the enthusiastic companion, was already regaling Clara with village gossip, her voice a cheerful counterpoint to the room's sombre mood. "The whole of St. Mary Mead is talking, Clara," she said, accepting a scone with a flourish. "Why, just yesterday, the baker swore he saw Roland at the station with a suitcase. Is he planning to leave, do you think?" Clara Hargreaves, seated at a rosewood table with the air of a queen presiding over a troubled court, gave a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. At 42, her angular features and severe black dress lent her an air of unyielding authority, her greying hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her thoughts into order. "Roland is always planning something, Mrs. Bantry," she said, her voice crisp as frost. "But running away would be too obvious, even for him. He knows the estate's future is at stake, and he's not fool enough to abandon his claim such. As it is," Miss Marple, sipping her tea with delicate precision, observed Clara closely. The woman's hands, though steady, gripped the teacup with a force that suggested suppressed fury or fear. "The estate is a great responsibility, Miss Hargreaves," Miss Marple said softly. "You seem to have a clear vision for its management. Did your aunt share your views?" Clara's lips thinned, and for a moment her composure wavered. "My aunt was a woman of strong opinions, Miss Marple, but she lacked practicality. She doted on Beatrice, indulged her artistic fancies, and neglected the estate's potential. Hargreaves Hall could be a model of modern efficiency new tenant farms. diversified investments, but Eleanor preferred sentiment over sense. I tried to advise her, but she wouldn't listen. Mrs. Bantry, nibbling her scone, raised an eyebrow. And now Beatrice is to inherit it all, or so Mr. Thorne says. That must be a blow, Clara, when you've such grand plans. Clara's eyes flashed, but her voice remained controlled. Beatrice is unfit to manage an estate of this magnitude. She's a dreamer, lost in her sketches, with no grasp of accounts or strategy. If the will is found, and it must be found, the Hall will suffer under her. I've already spoken to Mr. Thorne about contesting it, should it come to that. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost maternal, but her mind was as sharp as a needle. Contesting a will is a serious step, she said. You must have studied the estate's affairs closely to feel so confident. Do you visit Mr. Thorne's office often? Clara set her teacup down with a faint clink. Occasionally, to review the estate's ledgers. My aunt trusted me to oversee certain matters, though she rarely took my advice. I last saw Mr. Thorne 3 months ago, well before this fiasco with the will. His clerk, Ridley, was there, fussing, with papers as usual. I paid him no mind. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, unable to resist. That Ridley, the village is full of stories about him out late, sending telegrams to London. Do you think he could have taken the will, Clara? Clara's expression hardened. I wouldn't put it past anyone, Mrs. Bantry. Ridley's a shadow of a man, but shadows can hide mischief. Still, I blame Thorne's negligence. A solicitor's safe should be inviolable. Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded over her reticule. A safe is only as secure as the trust placed in it, she said. Tell me, Miss Hargreaves, where were you the evening before the will was found missing? I'm sure Inspector Craddock has asked, but it helps to hear it directly. Clara's gaze met Miss Marple's, steady and unyielding. I was at Mrs. Langley's cottage, playing bridge with her and the vicar. We finished around 10, and I returned home. The Hall's staff can confirm I was in my room by 11. I had no reason to be anywhere else. Mrs. Bantry, ever tactless, blurted, bridge. How dull for a woman like you, Clara. I'd have thought you'd be plotting the estate's future, not shuffling cards. Clara's smile was thin. Even generals need rest. Mrs. Bantry, bridge sharpens the mind, and Mrs. Langley is a tolerable partner. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Clara's alibi was solid, backed by respectable witnesses, but her ambition was a beacon, illuminating every word. A mind like yours, Miss Hargreaves, she said, must find many uses for its sharpness. The estate's accounts, for instance, do they reveal anything unusual? Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the table's edge. The accounts are complex, Miss Marple. My aunt's investments were sound, but her refusal to modernize cost us opportunities. I've studied them thoroughly, rents, yields, shares. If I were in charge, I'd double the estate's income within 5 years. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. Clara's knowledge was not merely thorough. It was intimate, the kind that came from long hours poring over ledgers. How admirable, she said. Such dedication speaks volumes. The conversation shifted to village matters, but Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Clara. Her ambition was not merely a desire for wealth, it was a need for control, a vision of Hargreaves Hall reshaped in her image. That vision, Miss Marple knew, could drive a woman to desperate measures, though whether Clara's desperation extended to theft remained to be seen after tea. Clara excused herself to attend to estate business, leaving Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry to explore the hall's grounds. The rose garden, though fading, was still a place of beauty, and they found Beatrice there, seated on a bench with her sketchbook, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She looked up, startled, as they approached, her delicate features tightening. With unease, "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, closing her sketchbook. "I didn't expect to see you here." Mrs. Bantry beamed, undeterred by Beatrice's reserve. "We've just had tea with Clarisech, a forceful woman. You must find it hard, living under her shadow." Beatrice's smile was faint, almost apologetic. Clara's always been certain. Aunt and Eleanor relied on her, but they argued often. "I tried to stay out of it." Miss Marple settled beside her, her manner so gentle it disarmed even Beatrice's wariness. "You have a gift for seeing beauty, Miss Hargreaves," she said, nodding at the sketchbook. "Your drawings must capture more than flowers and trees. Have you ever sketched a village, or perhaps Mr. Thorne's office?" Beatrice's fingers tightened on the book. "I have sketched the high street once or twice. The office is so plain, though. I prefer the hall or the church." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple noted the way her eyes darted away, as if guarding a secret. "How lovely," Miss Marple said. "And the night the will went missing, were you sketching then, or perhaps here at the hall?" Beatrice flushed, her hands trembling. "I was in my room, reading. I don't go out much at night. The maids can tell you I was here." Mrs. Bantry, sensing a mystery, pressed further. "But you must hear things, Beatrice, living in this house. Clara's so cross about the will, and Roland, well, he's a rogue, isn't he?" Beatrice's eyes filled with sudden tears, and she stood, clutching her sketchbook. "Please, I don't know anything. I just want this to be over." She hurried away, leaving Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry staring after her. Mrs. Bantry clucked her tongue. "Poor girl, she's terrified. But of what? Jane, Clara, Roland, or something else?" Miss Marple's gaze followed Beatrice's retreating figure. "Fear, Dolly, is a mirror. It shows us what lies beneath. Beatrice knows more than she says, but she's not ready to speak. We must be patient." Their walk back to the village took them past the church, where Miss Marple paused to examine the lane behind Mrs. Pratt's lodging house. The view of Thorne's office window, partially obscured by ivy, was clearer from here than she'd expected, and she noted a low wall that could easily be scaled. "Accessibility," she murmured, "is a thief's best friend." At Mrs. Bantry's cottage, they found a note from Inspector Craddock, requesting Miss Marple's presence at Thorne's office the next morning. "He's heard you've been poking about, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, chuckling. "I'll bet he's cross." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Inspectors are often cross, Dolly, but they come round. Craddock is thorough, but he misses the human side of things. Clara, for instance, her ambition is a key, but to what lock?" That evening, alone in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. Clara's alibi was impeccable, her motive clear, but her hands were clean at least on the surface. Yet her knowledge of the estate, her disdain for Beatrice, her readiness to contest the Wilthies, were not the actions of a woman content to wait. And Beatrice's fear, so palpable in the garden, suggested a truth Clara might not suspect. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the office, the safe, the window. Clara had visited Thorne's office, knew its layout, perhaps even its weaknesses. But the green paint on Ridley's coat, the muddy shoes, the telegrams, these pointed elsewhere. Clara's ambition was a force, but was it the force behind the theft? Or was she, like the others, a player in a larger game? As the fire crackled, Miss Marple closed her eyes, her mind weaving the day's observations into a pattern. Clara's ambition was a thread, bright and taut, but it was tangled with others Ridley's secrets. Roland's debts, Beatrice's silence. Somewhere in their knot was the truth about the vanished will. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct for human nature, was determined to untangle it. Chapter 6. Roland's debts. The October breeze swept through St. Mary Mead, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint promise of rain. The village, with its thatched cottages and tidy gardens, seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the undercurrents of suspicion that rippled beneath its placid surface. The disappearance of Eleanor Hargreaves' will had become the talk of every shop and parlour, and Miss Jane Marple, walking arm in arm with Mrs. Dolly Bantry toward the high street, listened to the whispers with the keen attention of a gardener tending delicate shoots. Her morning's mission was twofold: to visit the Red Lion pub, where Roland Hargreaves and Ernest Ridley had been seen together, and to call on the village tailor, who, rumour had it, had been stiffed by Roland's unpaid bills. Mrs. Bantry, her hat slightly askew from the wind, was in high spirits, her voice bubbling with the thrill of investigation. "Jane, I swear, this mystery gets juicier by the day. The grocer's wife told me Roland owes money all over the county tailors, bookmakers, even the jeweller in St. Albans. How does a man like that keep up appearances? And drinking with Ridley, it's positively sinister." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "Debt, Dolly, is a great leveller," she said softly. "It makes equals of gentlemen and clerks, if only." For a moment, Roland's habits are telling, but it's his choices that interest me. A man in debt is like a man in a storm heel, cling to any rope, no matter how frayed. Their first stop was the Red Lion, a stout, ivy-clad pub that served as the village's unofficial parliament. Its low ceilings and dark beams gave it a conspiratorial air, and the publican, Joe Baxter, a burly man with a face like weathered oak, greeted them with a nod. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, wiping a glass with a cloth. "Come about. The Hargreaves business, I reckon. Everyone's got a theory." Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a bench near the bar. "We're merely curious, Mr. Baxter," she said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "The village says you saw Mr. Ridley here the night the will went missing. Could you tell us about it?" Baxter leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the pride of a man whose testimony mattered. I saw him, Ernest Ridley, nervous as a ferret, locking up Thorne's office at 9 sharp. He came in for a pint afterward, sat in that corner. There he pointed to a shadowed table by the window. Didn't stay long left before 10. Said he was tired from filing papers. Mrs. Bantry, sipping a lemonade, raised an eyebrow. "And Roland Hargreaves, they say he's been here with Ridley. Were they together that night?" Baxter shook his head. "Not that night, Mrs. Bantry, but I've seen 'em together before a week or so back, maybe. Roland was buying, which is rare for him, seeing as he's always dodging bills. They were talking low, heads close like they didn't want ears on odd pair, if you ask me." Miss Marple's hands folded neatly over her reticule. "How interesting," she murmured. "And Roland, does he come here often?" Baxter snorted. "Often enough to owe me a month's worth of pints. He's all charm, that one, promising to pay next week with a grin that'd fool the devil. but he's been jumpy lately, looking over his shoulder like he expects trouble. Word is, he's got creditors in London breathing down his neck." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Creditors? Jane, do you think they're mixed up in the will business? Maybe Roland paid Ridley to steal it." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Possibilities, Dolly, are like seeds, some grow, some don't. Thank you, Mr. Baxter. You've been most illuminating." As they left the pub, Miss Marple paused a glance at Thorne's office across the street, its rear window just visible above the alley's low wall. The green paint on its frame, faded but distinct, lingered in her mind, as did the smudge she'd seen on Ridley's coat. A connection, she thought, but not the whole story. Their next stop was the tailor's shop, a cramped establishment, run by Mr. Amos Finch, a fastidious man with a tape measure perpetually draped around his neck. His shop smelled of wool and starch, and his eyes lit up with indignation when Miss Marple mentioned Roland's name. "Mr. Hargreaves," Finch exclaimed, brandishing a ledger. "He owes me for 3 suits fine worsted, mind you, cut to his exact specifications. Promised to pay last month, but not a penny. And he's got the nerve to order another jacket, saying it's for a business venture." Business, indeed. Miss Marple's expression was sympathetic, though her mind was cataloguing every detail. "How distressing, Mr. Finch," she said. "Has Mr. Hargreaves mentioned this venture? Perhaps a trip to London?" Finch's scowl deepened. "He let slip he's meeting someone in the city next week. Man of means, he called him. Sounded like he was hoping for a loan, or worse, one of those shady deals he's mixed up in. Gambling, they say, and not the gentlemanly sort." Mrs. Bantry, browsing a rack of fabrics, couldn't resist. "Gambling, Jane, that's it. Roland's desperate for money, so he's behind the will's disappearance. He must be." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. "Desperation, Dolly, is a motive, but not a plan. We must be careful not to leap too far." She turned back to Finch. "Did Mr. Hargreaves ever mention Mr. Ridley, the solicitor's clerk?" Finch blinked, surprised. "Ridley? Not directly, but I saw them together once, outside the shop. Roland was clapping him on the shoulder, all friendly-like, but Ridley looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I thought it odder, gentlemen. And a clerk, thick as thieves." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving connections as deftly as her knitting needles worked wool. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. You've given us much to consider." As they stepped into the street, Mrs. Bantry was practically vibrating with excitement. "Jane, it's clear as day. Roland's in debt, meeting shady characters, cozying up to Ridley. He's the key to this, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Roland is a key, Dolly, but to which lock? Debt makes a man bold, but it also makes him careless. We must see him in his element." Their chance came that afternoon, at Hargreaves Hall, where Clara had invited them for another gathering, ostensibly to discuss the estate, but clearly to keep the village's influential figures under her gaze. The drawing room was as imposing as ever, its heavy drapes and polished surfaces reflecting Clara's iron control. Roland was present, lounging in an armchair with a glass of brandy, his tailored suit impeccable despite his financial straits. Beatrice sat near the window, her sketchbook closed, her eyes fixed on the floor. Clara stood by the mantel, her posture rigid, as if bracing for battle. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice clipped. "I've asked Inspector Craddock to join us later. His investigation is moving too slowly, and I intend to press him for results. This delay is intolerable." Roland chuckled, swirling his brandy. "Oh, Clara, Let the man work. You'll give yourself a headache with all this commanding. The will's probably tucked in Aunt Eleanor's old desk, waiting for us to laugh. At our panic, Clara's eyes narrowed. Your flippancy, Roland, is why you're in the mess you're in. If you spent less time at card tables and more time attending to the family's interests, we might not be in this predicament. Roland's smile tightened, but his tone remained light. Dear sister, my interests are as tied to the estate as yours. I just prefer to enjoy life while I wait for our ship to come in. Miss Marple, seated on a velvet settee, observed the exchange with quiet intensity. Roland's charm was a shield, but beneath it she sensed a man cornered, his nonchalance a mask for desperation. Mr. Argrevis, she said, her voice gentle but probing, you seem remarkably calm about the will's disappearance. Do you think it will be found soon? Roland's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a flicker of unease. I'm an optimist, Miss Marple, he said, recovering his grin. Things have a way of turning up. Besides, I was at a card game in St. Albans the night it vanished. My friends will vouch for me. No time for sneaking about safes. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, pounced. A card game. With your debts, Roland, I'd think you'd avoid gambling. The village says you owe half of London. Roland's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. The village exaggerates, Mrs. Bantry. I've had a few bad runs, but I'm good for it. Always am. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her hands folded over her reticule. Debt, Mr. Hargreaves, can be a heavy burden. Have you ever discussed your troubles with anyone, perhaps Mr. Ridley, whom you know from the Red Lion? Roland's fingers tightened on his glass, but his smile held. Ridley, he's a decent chap for a clerk. We've shared a drink or two, but I don't burden him with my affairs. He's got enough on his plate, scurrying after Thorn. Clara snorted, her patience fraying. You'd do well to avoid such company, Roland. Ridley's no better than a servant, and you're a Hargreaves. Act like one. Beatrice, silent until now, looked up, her voice barely audible. Roland's kind to everyone, Clara. You shouldn't judge him. Roland shot her a grateful glance, but Clara's expression was icy. Kindness, Beatrice, doesn't pay debts or secure legacies. You'd do well to remember that. Miss Marple noted the interplay, her mind cataloguing every gesture. Roland's alibi, like Clara's, was supported by witnesses, but his debts were a motive as clear as daylight. His connection to Ridley, however casual he claimed, was a thread she could not ignore. And Beatrice's defense, tentative but sincere, suggested a loyalty that might complicate matters. Inspector Craddock arrived shortly after, his weathered face set in a frown. He greeted Miss Marple with a wary nod, clearly aware of her reputation. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, he said, I'm here to update the family, but I'll warn you I don't take kindly to amateurs muddying my investigation. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, disarming. Dear Inspector, I'm only an old woman with a curiosity about human nature. But do tell us, have you found anything new about the safe? Craddock's frown deepened. The safe's clean, no marks, no forced entry. I've checked Ridley's alibi, and it holds. Baxter at the Red Lion confirms he left the office at 9. As for the Hargreaves family, their alibi's a solid bridge for Miss Clara, a card game for Mr. Roland. And Miss Beatrice was here, according to the staff. I'm looking into Thorn's records now, but it's slow work. Clara's voice cut through the room. Slow is unacceptable, Inspector. The estate's future is at stake. Have you questioned Ridley thoroughly? He's the only one besides Thorne with access. Craddock bristled. I've questioned everyone, Miss Hargreaves. Ridley's nervous, but he's not hiding anything obvious. If you've got evidence, share it. Otherwise, let me do my job. Miss Marple, sensing the tension, interjected gently. Inspector, have you examined the office's surroundings? The alley, perhaps, or the window? Small details can be so revealing. Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. I've looked. The alley's too narrow for much, and the window was locked. No signs of tampering, but I'll check again if it'll keep you quiet. Mrs. Bantry stifled a giggle, but Miss Marple's expression was serene. Thank you, Inspector. You're most thorough. As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes catching a photograph on the mantel of young Roland, grinning beside Eleanor Hargreaves. The image spoke of happier times, but also of expectations unfulfilled. A charming boy, she murmured, but charm is a currency easily spent. On the drive back to St. Mary Mead, Mrs. Bantry was bursting with theories. Jane, Roland's up to his neck in this, I know it. Those debts, that meeting in London, he's scheming something with Ridley, mark my words. Miss Marple gazed at the passing fields, her thoughts far from the scenery. Roland is scheming, Dolly, but whether it's theft or something else, we cannot yet say. His debts are a chain, and Ridley may be a link, but not the only one. We must watch them both, and listen to what the village tells us. That evening, in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. Roland's debts were a motive, his charm a mask, but his alibi held, and his connection to Ridley was still a shadow, not a shape. The green paint, the muddy shoes, the telegrams, these pointed to Ridley, but Roland's role was murkier. Was he a puppet or a puppeteer? As the fire crackled, Miss Marple closed her eyes, her mind sifting through the day's clues. Roland's debts were a thread, bright and tangled, but they wove through a larger pattern: Clara's ambition, Beatrice's fear, Ridley's secrets. Somewhere in their knot was the truth about the vanished will, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct for human weakness, was determined to find it. Chapter 7. Beatrice's fear. The October air in St. Mary Mead carried a sharpness that hinted at winter's approach, and the leaves carpeting the lanes rustled underfoot like whispered secrets. Hargreaves Hall, with its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys, stood as a sentinel over the village, its grandeur a stark contrast to the unease that festered within. Miss Jane Marple, walking through the hall's rose garden with Mrs. Dolly Bantry, felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer. The missing will of Eleanor Hargreaves had woven a web of suspicion around her heirs, and Beatrice, the quiet artist poised to inherit the estate, seemed its most reluctant player. Today, Miss Marple intended to draw her out, sensing that Beatrice's silence held a key to the truth. Mrs. Bantry, bundled in a tweed coat, was in her element, her voice bubbling with the thrill of their sleuthing. Jane, I can't stop thinking about Roland and Ridley at the Red Lion, and Clara. Her ambition could move mountains, but Beatrice, she's like a ghost, drifting through this mess. Do you really think she knows something? Miss Marple, pale blue eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the garden where the last roses clung stubbornly to their stems. Beatrice, Dolly, is a watcher, she said softly. She sees what others miss, but fear keeps her silent. Fear is a powerful thing. It can hide the truth or reveal it if you know where to look. They found Beatrice on a rotten bench, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the hall's facade, its columns rendered with delicate precision. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, strands catching the sunlight, and her grey dress seemed to blend with the garden's muted tones. She looked up as they approached, her wide eyes betraying a flicker of alarm before she managed a shy smile. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect company. I was just sketching." Miss Marple settled beside her, her manner so gentle it disarmed even Beatrice's wariness. "What a lovely drawing," she said, peering at the sketchbook. "You have a gift for capturing detail, Miss Hargreaves. The hall looks almost alive in your hands." Beatrice flushed, her fingers tightening on her pencil. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's easier to draw than to deal with everything else." Mrs. Bantry, never one for subtlety, plopped onto the bench's other side. "Everything else being that missing will, I suppose. It's a dreadful business, Beatrice. Clara's ready to storm Mr. Thorne's office, and Roland's dodging creditors, left and right. You must be terrified with the whole estate hanging over you." Beatrice's eyes darted to the ground, her hands trembling. "I don't want the estate," she said, her voice breaking. "I never did. Aunt Eleanor thought I could manage it, but I can't. Clara's right, I'm not strong enough. I just want to paint, to be left alone." Miss Marple's smile was maternal, but her mind was as keen as a blade. "Strength, my dear, comes in many forms," she said. "Your aunt saw something in you, something special. But this business with the Willets made everyone uneasy. Tell me, have you noticed anything odd? Perhaps something you haven't shared? Even a small thing can matter." Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. I don't know anything for certain," she said. "But the night the will disappeared, I couldn't sleep. I was in my room, reading, but I heard footsteps in the hall, late, after midnight. I thought it was Roland, but when I looked, no one was there." Mrs. Bantry gasped, her eyes wide. "Footsteps. Jane, that's sinister. Was someone sneaking about the hall? Maybe stealing the will?" Miss Marple's gaze remained steady, her voice calm. "Footsteps can mean many things, darling. Miss Hargreaves, did you see anyone else that night? Perhaps outside, or earlier in the day?" Beatrice's cheeks paled, and she glanced around, as if the garden itself might be listening. I saw Mr. Ridley once, in the village, near Mr. Thorne's office. It was late, after dark, a few days before the will went missing. He was standing in the alley, looking up at the window. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to accuse him. He's always so nervous, and I didn't want to make trouble." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression was serene. "How observant you are," she said. "And you were right to be cautious. Accusations without proof are like unripe fruit, they sour quickly. But this is helpful, very helpful. Did you tell anyone what you saw?" Beatrice shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, Clara would have made a fuss, and Roland, he'd laugh it off. I just kept it to myself. I'm not brave, Miss Marple. I wish I were." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. "Courage, my dear, is not always loud. You've told us now, and that's a start. May I see your sketchbook? Your drawings might show us something you've not yet realized." Beatrice hesitated, then handed over the book, her fingers reluctant. Miss Marple turned the pages slowly, admiring sketches of the hall, the church, and the village green. One drawing caught her arduous study of the high street, with Thorne's office in the background. The window was faintly outlined, its green frame just visible, and a shadow, vague but human-shaped, lingered in the alley. "How interesting," Miss Marple murmured. "You've a keen eye, Miss Hargreaves. This shadow, do you recall who it was?" Beatrice's eyes widened, as if seeing the sketch anew. I don't know. It was just a shape, someone passing by. I didn't think it mattered." Mrs. Bantry leaned over, her excitement barely contained. "Jane, that's Ridley, I'll bet. Skulking about, up to no good. Beatrice, you're a marvel for catching it." Beatrice shrank back, her voice trembling. "Please, don't say anything yet. I don't want trouble. If Clara finds out, or Roland Dale think I'm spying." Miss Marple closed the sketchbook, her smile reassuring. "We'll be discreet, my dear. You've done nothing wrong. But if you see anything else, or remember anything, will you tell me? Sometimes the smallest detail unlocks the greatest puzzle." Beatrice nodded, her eyes still fearful but softened by Miss Marple's kindness. As they left her to her sketching, Mrs. Bantry was bursting with theories. "Jane, that girl's a goldmine. Footsteps in the hall, Ridley in the alley, a shadow in her sketch. She's seen more than she knows. Do you think she's in danger?" Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the garden's fading roses. "Beatrice is in a delicate position, Dolly," she said. "She's the heir, and that makes her a target, not just of suspicion, but of those who want the will to stay lost. We must watch her closely." Their next stop was the village, where Miss Marple had arranged to meet Inspector Craddock at the Red Lion. The pub was quieter now. Its lunchtime crowd dispersed, and Craddock sat at a corner table, his notebook open and his expression one of barely concealed frustration. He rose as they approached, his weathered face softening slightly at Miss Marple's presence, though his tone was gruff. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "I hope you're not stirring up trouble. This case is tricky enough without village rumours muddying the water." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, disarming. "Dear Inspector, we're only here to help. The village talks, as villagers do, but sometimes talk leads to truth. Have you learned anything new about Mr. Ridley or the office's surroundings?" Craddock sighed, flipping a page in his notebook. "Ridley's alibi checks out. Baxter saw him leave the office at 9, and his landlady confirms he was home by midnight, though she grumbled about muddy shoes. I've searched the alley again, but there's nothing, no footprints, no marks on the window. The safe's still a mystery, no scratches, no forced entry. I'm starting to think the will was never in there." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Never in the safe, but Mr. Thorne swore he locked it up." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained gentle. "Mr. Thorne is a man of habit, Inspector, but habits can blind us. Have you asked him about his ledger, the one with Mrs. Hargreaves' initials? It might show who else knew about the will." Craddock's brow furrowed. "Ledger? He mentioned it, but it's just accounts rents, investments. Nothing about the will itself. You think it's important?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost a sigh. "Everything is important, Inspector, until it isn't. And Miss Beatrice, have you spoken to her again?" "She's quiet, but her eyes see much." Craddock snorted. "That girl's too timid to say boo to a goose. She was in her room the night the will vanished, reading, according to the maids. No help there." Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward, but she heard footsteps, Inspector, late at night, in the hall, and she saw Ridley near the office, lurking in the alley. Jane thinks it's crucial. Craddock's eyes widened, his pencil pausing. Footsteps. Ridley in the alley. Why the devil didn't she tell me? Miss Marple's smile was serene. Beatrice is afraid, Inspector. Fear makes people silent, but it also makes them observant. Her sketches are worth a look. They capture more than she realizes. Craddock scribbled a note, his frustration giving way to grudging respect. I'll talk to her again, Miss Marple, but I wish you'd leave this to me. You're seeing shadows where there's only smoke. Miss Marple's laugh was musical. Shadows, Inspector, are cast by something real. You'll find them, I'm sure. As they left the pub, Mrs. Bantry was practically vibrating with excitement. Jane, you've got Craddock on the ropes. Beatrice's sketches, Ridley's, lurking do. You think she saw the theft? Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the high street, where Thorne's office stood, its window a silent witness to the mystery. Beatrice saw something, Dolly, but she doesn't yet know its meaning. Her fear is the key. It tells us the truth is close and dangerous. Their final errand took them to Mrs. Pratt's lodging house, where Miss Marple hoped to glean more about Ridley's habits. The landlady, ever eager to gossip, welcomed them into her cluttered parlour, her sharp eyes gleaming with curiosity. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, she said, pouring tea with a flourish. I suppose you're here about my Ernest for village. Won't stop talking about him, and that will. I tell you, he's no thief, but he's been odd lately, jumpier than usual. Miss Marple's smile was encouraging. Young men can be unsettled by such events. Mrs. Pratt, has Mr. Ridley had any visitors, or perhaps new habits? Mrs. Pratt leaned forward, her voice dropping. Well, now you mention it, he's been getting letters this week, from London, with fancy seals. And he's taken to locking his room, which he never did before. Last night, I heard him pacing till all hours, muttering to himself. Sounded like he was arguing with someone, but he was alone. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, arguing. Jane, that's suspicious. Maybe he's got a guilty conscience. Miss Marple's expression was serene, but her mind was racing. Guilt, Dolly, or fear can keep a man awake. Mrs. Pratt, have you noticed anything else? Perhaps something he brought home or left behind? Mrs. Pratt thought for a moment, then snapped her fingers. Come to think of it, he had a new suitcase last week, smart leather, too fine for a clerk's wages. Said it was a gift, but I've my doubts. It's in his room, under the bed. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Thank you, Mrs. Pratt. You've been most helpful. As they walked back to Mrs. Bantry's cottage, the sky darkened. A storm brewing on the horizon. Mrs. Bantry was full of questions. Jane, what do you make of it? Beatrice's fear, Ridley's suitcase, those letters, it's all connected, isn't it? Miss Marple's gaze was distant, her thoughts weaving a pattern only she could see. It's a tangle, Dolly, but every tangle has a loose end. Beatrice's fear is the heart of it. She's seen something, or someone, that threatens her. Ridley. Secrets, Roland's debts, Clara's ambition, they're all threads, but Beatrice's silence ties them together. That evening, in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. Beatrice's sketch, with its shadowy figure, lingered in her mind, as did the footsteps in the hall and Ridley's late-night pacing. Fear was a powerful force, but so was observation, and Beatrice's quiet watchfulness was a clue in itself. The truth, Miss Marple knew, was close. hidden in the shadows of Hargreaves Hall, and with her unerring instinct for human weakness, she was determined to bring it to light. Chapter 8. The village gossip. The October drizzle had settled over St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's cottages and lending a conspiratorial hush to its lanes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and the villagers, huddled under umbrellas or hurrying through the mist, exchanged whispers about the Hargreaves affair with the fervour of a congregation sharing a sermon. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, walked with a purposeful step toward the village shop, her black umbrella tilted against the rain. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, ever her enthusiastic shadow, matched her pace, her tweed coat speckled with droplets, as she recounted the latest rumours with unrestrained glee. "Jane, it's positively thrilling," Mrs. Bantry said, her voice cutting through the patter of rain. "The butcher's wife swears she saw Ernest Ridley buying a gold watch at the jeweller's in St. Albans Far, $2,000 for a clerk's pocket, and the postmistress told me Roland got a letter from London, marked urgent in red ink. Do you think it's from his creditors, or something worse?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes gleamed beneath the brim of her hat, though her expression remained serene. "Gossip, Dolly, is like a river," she said softly. "It carries truth and silt in equal measure. A gold watch, an urgent letter, these are ripples, but they point to deeper currents. We must sift carefully to find what lies beneath." Their destination was the village shop, a cramped emporium where Mrs. Murgatroyd presided over shelves of tinned goods and jars of sweets, her sharp tongue as much a fixture as the brass scales on her counter. The shop was a hub of village life, where news was traded as freely as shillings, and Miss Marple knew that Mrs. Murgatroyd's observations could illuminate the shadows cast by the missing will. The bell above the door jangled as they entered, and Mrs. Murgatroyd looked up from her ledger, her eyes narrowing with the delight of a woman who sensed a story. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come in out of that damp. I suppose you're here about the Hargreaves business. The whole village is buzzing. Clara's raging, Roland's dodging debts, and that poor Beatrice looks like she'll faint if you say Will too loudly." Miss Marple smiled, setting her umbrella by the door. "It's a troubling affair, Mrs. Murgatroyd," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "The village always knows more than it thinks. Have you heard anything about Mr. Ridley, perhaps? He seems to be on everyone's lips." Mrs. Murgatroyd's eyes lit up, and she leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Ridley's a queer one, Miss Marple. The butcher's wife reliable. Mind you saw him at the jeweller's last week, buying a gold watch, the kind you'd expect on a gentleman, not a clerk. Paid in cash, too, which raised eyebrows. Where's a lad like him getting that sort of money? And he's been seen at the post office, sending telegrams to London 3. In a week, my sister says." Mrs. Bantry, browsing a rack of biscuits, gasped. "A gold watch. Jane, that's proof he's up to no good. Maybe he sold the will to Roland's creditors." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Proof, Dolly, is a heavy word. Let's call it a clue for now. Mrs. Murgatroyd, has Mr. Ridley been in your shop recently? Perhaps buying something unusual?" Mrs. Murgatroyd thought for a moment, her fingers tapping the counter. "Come to think of it, he bought a tin of boot polish yesterday, black, the good kind. Said he needed to spruce up for a meeting. Looked nervous, kept glancing out the window like he expected someone to pounce. And he paid with a crisp pound note, which isn't like him, he's usually scraping pennies. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail as deftly as her knitting needles worked wool. Boot polish and a gold watch, she murmured. A man preparing for something or someone. And what of Mr. Roland Hargreaves? The village seems to have much to say about him. Mrs. Murgatroyd's lips pursed, her tone dripping with disapproval. Roland's a charmer, but a rogue through and through. My sister, at the post office, handled that letter from London, red ink, marked urgent, addressed to him at the hall. She couldn't see the sender, but it had a city postmark, and the baker's boy saw him at the station 2 days ago, carrying a suitcase, though he didn't board a train. Skulking, the boy said, like he was waiting for someone. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. Skulking. Jane, he's planning to run, or worse, he's meeting someone about the will. Don't you think? Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. Roland is a man in a corner. Dolly and cornered men are unpredictable. Thank you, Mrs. Murgatroyd. You've given us much to ponder. As they left the shop, the drizzle had thickened, and Miss Marple paused under the awning to adjust her umbrella. Her thoughts were on Ridley's gold watch and Roland's letter signs of sudden wealth and secret plans. The village gossip, though prone to exaggeration, had a core of truth, and she intended to follow its threads. Her next stop was the post office, where Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, might confirm the details of Roland's letter and Ridley's telegrams. The post office was a narrow room, its walls lined with pigeonholes, and its counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. Miss Weatherby, a thin woman with a beak-like nose and a memory for every letter that passed through her hands, greeted them with a knowing smile. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, she said, adjusting her spectacles. I've been expecting you. The Hargreaves affairs got everyone in a tizzy, and I reckon you're sniffing out the truth. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, disarming. We're only curious, Miss Weatherby. The village says you handled a letter for Mr. Roland Hargreaves and telegrams for Mr. Ridley. Could you tell us anything about them? Miss Weatherby's eyes gleamed, and she leaned forward, her voice low. The letter for Roland came Monday, from London, thick envelope, red ink, marked urgent. I couldn't see the sender's name, but the handwriting was sharp, professional, like a lawyer's or a banker's. Roland picked it up himself, looked like he'd swallowed a lemon when he saw it, and Ridley's telegrams to the same address in London, sent over the past week. All short, urgent things, and he paid extra for priority. He was sweating buckets each time he came in. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. Jane, it's a conspiracy. Ridley's wiring money to London, and Roland's getting orders from his creditors. The will's at the heart of it, I'm sure. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Connections. Dolly are like stitches, they hold only if the thread is strong. Miss Weatherby, have you noticed anything else about Mr. Ridley, perhaps his demeanour, or his visitors? Miss Weatherby nodded, eager to share. He's been jumpy, worse than usual yesterday. He was here when a man came in, a stranger, city type, in a smart suit. Didn't give his name, but he asked for Ridley by name, then left when I said he wasn't here. Ridley turned white as a sheet when I told him later. Said it was a mistake, but I don't believe it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained serene. A stranger from the city, she murmured. How intriguing. Thank you, Miss Weatherby. You've been most helpful. As they stepped back into the rain, Mrs. Bantry was bursting with theories. Jane, that stranger must be Roland's creditor, or maybe Ridley's accomplice. Do you think they're working together to sell the will? Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the high street. where Thorne's office loomed through the mist. Its green-framed window, a silent sentinel. They're working toward something, Dolly, but whether it's together or at cross purposes, we cannot yet say. We must see Mr. Thorne again, and perhaps Ridley, to test these ripples. Their afternoon took them to Thorne's office, where Miss Marple had arranged to meet the solicitor under the pretext of discussing village charity records. The office was as orderly as ever, its shelves heavy with legal tomes and its air thick with the scent of ink. Mr. Thorne, his walrus moustache drooping, greeted them with a mixture of courtesy and wariness, his eyes shadowed by the strain of the ongoing investigation. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, he said, gesturing to chairs. I'm at my wit's end with this will business. Inspector Craddock's been through every file, and still nothing. I trust you're not here to add to my troubles. Miss Marple's smile was reassuring. Not at all, Mr. Thorne. We're merely tying up loose ends for the church fund. But since we're here, might we see the safe again? I find it such a fascinating contraption. Thorne hesitated, then nodded, leading them to the iron safe by the wall. Its gleaming dial and unblemished surface seemed to mock their efforts, a fortress that had yielded no secrets. Miss Marple ran a gloved finger along its edge, her eyes drifting to the window behind Thorne's desk. The alley outside was barely visible through the net curtains, but she noted the drainpipe's proximity. Its green paint a match for the smudge on Ridley's coat. A fine safe, she said, her voice soft. And the window, Mr. Thorne, is it always locked? Thorne's moustache twitched. Always, Miss Marple. I check it myself every evening. The alley's too narrow for mischief, and the latch is secure. Craddock's men confirmed it. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on the window's frame. Of course. And Mr. Ridley, has he been his usual self? A clerk's life must be trying under such scrutiny. Thorne sighed, rubbing his temples. Ridley's been jumpier than usual, I'll grant you. Dropping pens, misfiling papers, he's not himself. But he's loyal, always has been. I can't believe he'd tamper with the safe. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward. But the village says he's come into money, Mr. Thorne. A gold watch, telegrams, to London, doesn't that strike you as odd? Thorne's eyes widened, his jowls quivering. A gold watch, I hadn't heard. He's never mentioned anything like that. Telegrams, yes, he said they were personal matters. I don't pry into my clerk's affairs. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was racing. Personal matters can be so revealing, she said. Might we speak to Mr. Ridley? He may have noticed something you've overlooked. Thorne called for Ridley, who appeared from the back room, his thin frame hunched and his spectacles slipping. Down his nose, his eyes darted between Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry, and she noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. Despite the coolness of the room, Mr. Ridley, Miss Marple said, her voice disarming, we were just discussing the safe. You left the office at 9 the night the will vanished, I believe. Did you notice anything unusual that evening, perhaps someone in the alley, or a sound? Ridley's hands trembled, and he pushed his spectacles up with an ink-stained finger. No, ma'am, he stammered. I locked up as usual, had a pint at the Red Lion, and went home. Nothing out of the ordinary. Joe Baxter saw me leave. Mrs. Bantry pounced. But your landlady says you weren't home till midnight, and with muddy shoes. And what's this about a gold watch? A clerk doesn't come by that honestly. Ridley's face drained of colour, and he clutched the edge of Thorne's desk. I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Bantry. The watch was a gift from a cousin. and I was home late because I took a walk. The mud was from the lane. I swear I've done nothing wrong." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. "A walk can clear the mind, Mr. Ridley, but the village is curious, and curiosity breeds questions. Have you had any visitors lately, perhaps from London?" Ridley's eyes widened, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. "No visitors," he said, too quickly. "Just letters, family matters. Please, I've told the inspector everything." Thorne, sensing his clerk's distress, intervened. "That's enough, ladies. Ridley's been through enough. If you've no evidence, I'll thank you to leave him be." Miss Marple rose, her smile serene. "Of course, Mr. Thorne, we meant no harm. Thank you both for your time." As they stepped into the rain, Mrs. Bantry was practically bouncing. "Jane, he's guilty as sin. That watch, those letters, he's hiding something big. And Roland's letter do. You think they're in cahoots?" Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the office window, its green frame glistening in the rain. "Ridley is hiding something, Dolly, but whether it's theft or fear, we cannot yet say. Roland's letter suggests a larger game, one that may involve both of them or neither. We must listen to the village and watch where the ripples lead." That evening, in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The village gossip had painted a vivid picture. Ridley's watch, Roland's letter, the stranger at the post office, but it was a picture with gaps. Ridley's fear was palpable, his wealth inexplicable, and Roland's secrets were piling up like unpaid bills. Somewhere, in the chatter of St. Mary Mead, was the truth about the vanished will. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct for human nature, was determined to find it. Chapter 9. The hidden thread. The October mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, shrouding the village in a silver haze that seemed to mirror the elusive truth of Eleanor Hargreaves' missing will. The lanes, slick with rain, reflected the dim glow of lamplights, and the air carried the faint tang of wood smoke from cottage chimneys. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the damp, walked with a measured step toward Mrs. Pratt's lodging-house, her black umbrella a shield against the drizzle. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her faithful companion, hurried alongside, her tweed coat damp but her spirits undimmed by the weather or the mystery's complexity. "Jane, I can hardly keep up with it all," Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, her voice cutting through the mist. Ridley's gold watch, Roland's urgent letter, Beatrice's shadowy sketches, like a jigsaw with half the pieces missing. And now you're off to quiz Mrs. Pratt again. Do you think she's seen something new about Ridley? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes gleamed beneath her hat's brim, her expression as serene as a still pond. "Mrs. Pratt sees more than she knows, Dolly," she said softly. "A land parlour is a window into her lodger's soul. Ridley's secrets are piling up telegrams, a suitcase. Late night, pacing, and I suspect Mrs. Pratt has glimpsed another piece of the puzzle. Every thread counts, and we're close to weaving them together." Their visit to Mrs. Pratt was prompted by a nagging suspicion in Miss Marple's mind. Stirred by the village gossip and Beatrice's hesitant revelations, Ridley's behaviour, his unexplained wealth, his nervous demeanour, his connection to Roland pointed to a man caught in a web of his own making. But it was Beatrice's sketch, with its faint shadow in the alley, and her mention of Ridley near Thorne's office, that had set Miss Marple's thoughts racing. The clerk was a linchpin, she felt, and Mrs. Pratt's observations might tighten the knot. The lodging-house, a red brick haven amid the mist, welcomed them with the glow of a parlour fire. Mrs. Pratt, her sharp eyes, bright with curiosity, ushered them in, her apron dusted with flour from a morning's baking. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, setting a kettle on the stove. "Back again, are you? I reckon it's about my Ernest. The village won't give him a moment's peace. With all this talk of wills and watchers." Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her hands folded over her reticule. "It's a trying time for everyone, Mrs. Pratt," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "Mr. Ridley must feel the strain, being so close to Mr. Thorne's office. Have you noticed anything new about him, perhaps, his habits, or something he's brought home?" Mrs. Pratt's lips pursed, her eagerness to share outweighing her loyalty to her lodger. "Well, now you mention it, he's been ater than ever. That suitcase I told you about, the leather one, too fine for his wages. He's been fussing over it, keeping it locked in his wardrobe. Last night I caught him polishing it, muttering about being ready. Ready for what, I'd like to know. And he's taken to burning papers in his great bits of letters, I think, though I couldn't see what they said." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, her teacup pausing halfway to her lips. "Burning letters. Jane, that's incriminating. He's covering his tracks. I'll bet maybe destroying proof he took the will." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Proof, Dolly, is a delicate thing. Burning papers suggests fear, not necessarily guilt. Mrs. Pratt, has Mr. Ridley had any visitors lately, or perhaps mentioned a trip?" Mrs. Pratt leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No visitors. But he did say something odd yesterday about needing to settle things in London soon. Sounded like he was planning to go, though he didn't say when. And there's his notebook always scribbling in it, locking it away like it's gold. I saw him drop it once, and a page fell out, full of numbers and initials. Looked like a code, if you ask me." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained serene. "A notebook," she murmured. "How intriguing. And the suitcase, have you seen inside it, Mrs. Pratt?" Mrs. Pratt shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "I'm not one to pry, Miss Marple, but I did peek when he left it open once. Just clothes, mostly, and a packet of papers tied with string. Couldn't read M without my glasses, but they looked official, like legal documents." Mrs. Ban clapped her hands. "Legal documents. Jane, that's it. The will's in that suitcase, hidden away. We must tell Inspector Craddock." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. "Patience, Dolly. A suitcase is a hiding place, but not a confession." "Thank you, Mrs. Pratt. You've given us much to consider." As they left the lodging house, the mist had thickened, cloaking the village in a dreamlike haze. Miss Marple paused to glance at the lane behind Mrs. Pratt's, noting its proximity to Thorne's office. The rear window, with its faded green frame, was just visible, and she recalled the shadow in Beatrice's sketch of figure that might have been Ridley, poised to act. A clerk, she thought, is never just a clerk when ambition stirs. There. Next stop was Hargreaves Hall, where Miss Marple had promised to return Beatrice's sketchbook, left behind during their last visit. The hall's grandeur was undimmed by the weather, its windows glowing like beacons through the mist. Clara greeted them in the drawing-room, her black dress as severe as her expression. But Beatrice was in the conservatory, surrounded by potted ferns and her easel. Miss Marple, sensing an opportunity for a private word, asked to see her alone, leaving Mrs. Bantry to distract Clara with village chatter. The conservatory was a humid oasis, its glass walls streaked with rain. Beatrice stood by her easel, a half-finished painting of the rose garden before her, her auburn hair catching the dim light. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary but softened by the older woman's gentle smile. "Miss Hargreaves," Miss Marple said, handing her the sketchbook. "I thought you'd want this back. Your drawings are remarkable, so full of life and secrets." Beatrice's fingers trembled as she took the book, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I didn't mean to leave it. I've been so scattered lately." Miss Marple settled onto a wicker chair, her manner disarming. "It's a trying time, my dear. The Will's disappearance has unsettled everyone, but you most of all, I think. You mentioned seeing Mr. Ridley near Mr. Thorne's office, and your sketch showed a shadow in the alley. Have you remembered anything else, perhaps? Something you saw or heard?" Beatrice's eyes darted to the sketchbook, her hands tightening. "Around it, I don't know what else to say," she stammered. "That shadow, it was just someone passing by, I think. But I did see Mr. Ridley again, 2 nights ago, near the church. He was carrying a suitcase, and he looked frightened. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to cause trouble." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her smile was reassuring. "You're very wise to be cautious, my dear. Trouble finds its own way, doesn't it? And this suitcase, did you see where he went with it?" Beatrice shook her head, her voice trembling. "He disappeared into the lane by Mrs. Pratt's. I thought he was going home, but it was late, nearly 11. I shouldn't have been out, but I needed air. Please, don't tell Clarechet, think I'm meddling." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but steady. "Your secret is safe, Miss Hargreaves. You've been most helpful. If you see anything else, will you tell me? Sometimes the smallest observation changes everything." Beatrice nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. As Miss Marple rose to leave, she glanced at the painting on the easel, noting its meticulous detail, the roses, the gravel path, and, in the background, a faint outline of the hall's library window. "You see so much," she murmured, filing the detail away. Back in the drawing room, Clara was grilling Mrs. Bantry about Inspector Craddock's progress, her voice sharp with impatience. "The man's incompetent," she declared. "Half a mind to hire a detective from London. This delay is ruining the estate's prospects." Mrs. Bantry, ever tactless, chuckled. "Oh, Clara, you don't need a detective with Jane around. She's got Ridley's number, and Roland's too. Did you know about Ridley's gold watch, or Roland's urgent letter?" Clara's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "A gold watch? That's news to me. As for Roland, he's always getting letters from his disreputable friends. I pay them no mind. Miss Marple, have you found anything concrete, or is this just village tittle?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, her voice soft. "The village talks, Miss Hargreaves, and talk often points to truth. Mr. Ridley's habits are curious, and Mr. Roland's debts are no secret. But I'm more interested in the estate's records. You've studied them closely. Have you noticed anything amiss, perhaps in the ledgers Mr. Thorne keeps?" Clara's lips thinned, but she answered readily. "The ledgers are meticulous, Miss Marple. I've reviewed them for years, at my aunt's request. The estate's finances are sound, though mismanaged. If I were in charge, I'd streamline the rents and sell off some underperforming assets. But nothing's amiss, no discrepancies, no missing funds." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Clara's knowledge was too precise, her confidence too absolute. "How thorough you are," she said. "Such diligence is rare." As they left the hall, the mist had turned to a steady rain, and Mrs. Bantry was bursting with excitement. Jane, Beatrice's suitcase story clinches it. Got the will in that bag, I'm sure of it. And Clara's so sure of herself. She's hiding something, too, isn't she? Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the hall's silhouette, its windows glowing through the rain. Clara hides nothing but her ambition. Dolly, she said. Beatrice's fear, Ridley's suitcase, these are the threads that matter now. We must see Mr. Thorne again, and perhaps Inspector Craddock, to test our suspicions. Their final stop was Thorne's office, where Miss Marple hoped to catch Ridley off guard. The solicitor was out, but Ridley was there, sorting files with a nervous energy that bordered on panic. His spectacles slipped down his nose as he looked up, his face paling at the sight of Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, he stammered, dropping a folder. Mr. Thorne's not here. Can I help you? Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her voice gentle. We won't keep you, Mr. Ridley. I was just admiring the office's orderliness. You must work late to keep it so. Have you been working? On anything special, perhaps? Papers for London? Ridley's hands trembled, and he pushed his spectacles up with an ink-stained finger. No, ma'am, just the usual files. Nothing special. I don't know anything about London, except family matters. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward. Family matters. Like that suitcase you were seen with, or those telegrams. The village is talking, Mr. Ridley, and it's not kind. Ridley's face drained of colour, and he gripped the desk. For support. I haven't done anything wrong, he said, his voice cracking. The suitcase is mine, for a trip, that's all. And the telegrams, they're private. Please, leave me alone. Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft. We mean no harm, Mr. Ridley, but secrets have a way of surfacing, like bubbles in a pond. If you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear. As they left, Mrs. Bantry was practically bouncing. Jane, he's terrified. That suitcase, those papers, he's the thief, I know it. What's our next move? Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the office window. It's green. Frame slick with rain. Our next move, Dolly, is to watch and listen. Ridley's fear is a signal, and Beatrice's observations are a map. The truth is close, hidden in the shadows of St. Mary Mead. That evening, in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The day's clues, Ridley's suitcase, Beatrice's sketch. Clara's certainty wove a pattern in her mind, intricate but incomplete. Ridley was the key, she felt, but his role was unclear, thief, pawn, or something else. The truth, she knew, was near, waiting for the right thread to unravel it, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct for human nature, was ready to pull. Chapter 10. The confrontation. The October rain had relented, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a fragile sunlight that glinted off the wet cobbles and gilded the rooftops. Hargreaves Hall, its Georgian facade softened by the morning's glow, stood as a monument to the Hargreaves legacy, but within its walls the air was charged with the tension of an approaching storm. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the grand library with its oak-panelled walls and towering bookshelves, felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer. The missing will of Eleanor Hargreaves had woven a tapestry of greed, fear, and deception, and today Miss Marple intended to unravel it. She had requested a gathering of the family, Mr. Percival Thorne and his clerk Ernest Ridley, under the pretext of discussing new leads with Inspector Craddock. Her true purpose, however, was to lay bare the truth. Mrs. Bantry, perched on a velvet-holstered chair beside her, was barely containing her excitement, her eyes darting between the assembled figures. "Jane, this is it, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "You've got them all, here, Clara, Roland, Beatrice, Ridley, Thorn. I can feel the air crackling. You're going to catch the thief red-handed. I know it." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled, but her expression remained serene, her hands folded neatly over her black silk reticule. "Patience, Dolly," she murmured. "A mystery is like a knot pulled too quickly, and it tightens. We must ease the truth free, thread by thread." The library was a fitting stage for the confrontation, its heavy drapes drawn back to admit the sunlight, which cast long shadows across the polished floor. Clara Hargreaves stood by the marble fireplace, her angular frame rigid in her black morning dress, her greying hair pulled tightly back, accentuating the sharpness of her features. Her dark eyes swept the room with the authority of a woman, accustomed to command, though a faint tremor in her hands betrayed her unease. Roland Hargreaves lounged in an armchair near a window, his tailored suit impeccable despite the whispers of his debts, his handsome face wearing a smile that was equal parts charm and defiance. Beatrice Hargreaves sat on a sofa, her auburn hair loosely pinned, her delicate hands clutching a sketchbook as if it were a shield. Her wide eyes avoided the others, fixed instead on the intricate rug beneath her feet. Mr. Thorn, his walrus moustache quivering, stood by a mahogany table, a ledger open before him as if to anchor his authority. Beside him, Ernest Ridley hovered, his thin frame hunched, his spectacles slipping down his nose, his ink-stained fingers twitching with nervous energy. Inspector Craddock, a sturdy figure with a weathered face, leaned against a bookcase, his notebook in hand and his expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. He had agreed to Miss Marple's request for the gathering, though his gruff demeanour suggested he doubted its necessity. "Miss Marple," Craddock said, his voice edged with impatience, "I hope you've got something solid to justify this. My men are stretched thin, and I've got better things to do than play parlour games." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost musical, disarming the room's tension. "Dear Inspector, I assure you, this is no game. The disappearance of Mrs. Hargreaves' will has caused great distress, and I believe we can resolve it today. May I begin?" Craddock grunted, waving a hand. "Go on then, but make it quick." Miss Marple rose, her slight figure commanding attention despite her unassuming air. She moved to the center of the room, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning, each face with the quiet intensity of a naturalist studying rare specimens. "A will," she began, her voice clear and steady, "is more than paper. It is a promise, a legacy, and, in this case, a spark that has ignited fear, ambition, and deceit. Mrs. Hargreaves' will, favouring Miss Beatrice, has vanished from a locked safe, leaving us to wonder who would dare to steal it and why." Clara's lips thinned, her voice cutting through the silence. "Miss Marple, we all know the stakes. The estate's future hangs in the balance, and Mr. Thorn's negligence is to blame. Get to the point." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, unruffled. "Patience, Miss Hargreaves. The point is near, but we must first understand the threads that lead to it. Let us begin with the safer Braddon and Sons, impregnable, untouched by force, yet empty of its most precious contents. Mr. Thorn, you locked the will inside 3 days before it vanished, did you not?" Thorn nodded, his jowls wobbling. "I did, Miss Marple. I checked it myself, sealed in its envelope with Mrs. Hargreaves' crest. The safe was secure when I left that evening. Miss Marple turned to Ridley, whose face had paled to the hue of parchment. And you, Mr. Ridley, were in the office until 9 that night, sorting files. You locked the door and went to the Red Lion, where Mr. Baxter saw you. But you did not return home until nearly midnight, with muddy shoes. Where were you for those 3 hours? Ridley's hands trembled, and he pushed his spectacles up with a shaking finger. I took a walk, ma'am," he stammered. "The lane was muddy, that's all. I swear I didn't touch the safe. I'd never betray Mr. Thorne." Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward. "A walk, with a gold watch in your pocket and telegrams to London. The village says you've come. Into money, Mr. Ridley, money a clerk doesn't earn honestly." Ridley's eyes widened, and he gripped the table's edge. "The watch was a gift, Mrs. Bantry, from a cousin. The telegrams were family matters. I've done nothing wrong." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft but relentless. "Family matters, Mr. Ridley, can cover many sins. Let us turn to another thread, Miss Beatrice, who has seen more than she says. Miss Hargreaves, you told me you saw Mr. Ridley near Mr. Thorne's office, late at night, and your sketchbook captured a shadow in the alley. You also heard footsteps in the hall, after midnight, the night the will vanished. These are not trifles." "My dear," Beatrice flinched, her fingers tightening on her sketchbook. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. "I only saw him once, and the shadow. It was just someone passing by. The footsteps might have been the maid's." Clara's voice was sharp, her patience fraying. "Beatrice, if you know something, speak. This dithering is intolerable. If Ridley's the thief, let's have it out." Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture calming the room. "Accusations, Miss Hargreaves, must be precise. Let us consider Mr. Roland Hargreaves, whose debts are no secret. Mr. Hargreaves, you were at a card game in St. Albans, the night the will vanished, but you've been seen with Mr. Ridley at the Red Lion, and a letter from London, marked urgent, suggests connections you've not shared. What can you tell us?" Roland's smile was sly, his brandy glass glinting in the sunlight. "Miss Marple, you're a regular sleuth. My debts are old news, and the letter was from a friend, nothing more. As for Ridley, we've shared a pint. Or two, hardly a crime. I was at that card game, and my mates will swear to it. You're barking up the wrong tree." Mrs. Bantry snorted. "A friend in London, with creditors chasing you, Roland. And that suitcase at the station planning a getaway, were you?" Roland's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. "The village loves its stories, Mrs. Bantry. The suitcase was for a trip that never happened. I'm not running anywhere." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained gentle. "Not running, perhaps, but hiding something. Mr. Hargreaves, let us return to the office, where a window overlooks a narrow alley, its frame painted green. I found a smudge of green paint on your coat, Mr. Ridley, and a drain pipe near that window offers a path for an agile climber. Miss Beatrice's sketch showed a shadow in that alley, and you, Mr. Ridley, were seen there late at night." Ridley's face drained of colour, and he swayed, clutching the table. I was checking the office, ma'am, making sure it was secure. The paint. I brushed against the pipe by accident. I swear I didn't climb anything." Thorne's moustache quivered, his voice rising. "Ridley, what's this nonsense? You never mentioned checking the office." If you've been careless, I'll have your job. Miss Marple's voice cut through the uproar, calm but commanding. Not careless, Mr. Thorne, but calculated. Let me tell you a story of a clerk who once worked for a solicitor in London, dismissed for irregularities. A clerk who came to St. Mary Mead, diligent but ambitious, who saw in Mrs. Hargreaves' will an opportunity. Mr. Ridley. You knew the will favoured Miss Beatrice, leaving Mr. Rowland and Miss Clara with less than they hoped. You also knew Mr. Rowland's debts and his desperation, because you drank with him at the Red Lion. Ridley's eyes were wild, his voice a croak. You're wrong, Miss Marple. I've never ever done anything like that. Miss Marple's gaze was unrelenting, her voice soft as a blade. You climbed that drainpipe, Mr. Ridley, using your key to enter through the window, avoiding the locked door. You took the will, not for yourself, but to broker a deal with a man in London, creditor of Mr. Rowland's, perhaps who saw profit in manipulating the estate's future. Your telegrams, your gold watch, your suitcase packed with papers, these are the signs of a man preparing to profit from betrayal. Rowland leapt to his feet, his charm crumbling. This is outrageous. I've no part in this. Ridley, if you've dragged me into your mess, Beatrice's voice, small but clear, broke through. Please, stop. I saw him, Miss Marple, with the suitcase, near the church. He was talking to a man, a stranger, in the lane. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid, but it's true. Ridley's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he sobbed. It was just a chance away to get out from under. The man in London, he knew Rowland's debts, said he'd pay me to get the will. I thought no one would know. Craddock, stunned, stepped forward, his notebook forgotten. Ridley, you're admitting it. You stole the will. Ridley nodded, tears streaming down his face. It's in my suitcase, at Mrs. Price's, hidden in a false bottom. I was going to meet him tomorrow, in London. Rowland didn't know I used his name to make it look legitimate. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Clara's voice was icy, her eyes blazing. You wretched little man, you've jeopardized the estate, my aunt's legacy. Inspector, arrest him at once. Rowland, pale but composed, sank back into his chair. I swear I knew nothing of this. Ridley's a liar if he says I was involved. Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes lingering on Rowland. Perhaps, Mr. Hargreaves, but your debts made you a convenient pawn. The truth has a way of catching up, even to the innocent. Craddock, recovering his authority, turned to Ridley. You're coming with me, lad. We'll get that suitcase and have a long talk at the station. As Ridley was led away, Thorne's face was ashen, his voice a whisper. My office, my reputation ruined. By a clerk I trusted him. Beatrice, trembling, clutched her sketchbook, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's. Thank you, she whispered. I was so afraid, but you saw it all. Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. You saw it too, my dear. Your courage, quiet as it was, made the difference. As the room emptied, Mrs. Bantry grabbed Miss Marple's arm, her voice a delighted squeal. Jane, you're a marvel. You had him cornered from the start. Ridley, the suitcase, the drainpipe, how did you know? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice soft. People, Dolly, are like books. You only need to read their pages carefully. Ridley's fear, Beatrice's sketches, the villagers' whispers. Told the story, I merely listened. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting Hargreaves Hall in a golden glow. The will was found, the thief exposed, but Miss Marple knew the ripples of greed and ambition would linger. As she walked with Mrs. Bantry to the waiting car, her mind was already turning to the next thread, the next knot in the endless tapestry of human nature. Chapter 11. The Confession. The late October sun cast a mellow glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden light filtering through the bare branches of the elms and gilding the wet cobbles of the village lanes. Hargreaves Hall, its Georgian elegance softened by the autumn haze, stood as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded within its walls. The library, with its oak-panelled grandeur and the lingering scent of old leather, was quieter now, the air no longer crackling with the tension of accusation. Yet a hush of anticipation remained, as if the room itself awaited the final unravelling of Eleanor Hargreaves' missing will. Miss Jane Marple, seated once more in a high-backed chair, her black silk reticule resting on her lap, surveyed the gathered company with the serene intensity of a chess master contemplating her final move. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, perched beside her, was a bundle of barely contained excitement, her eyes darting between the figures assembled in the library. "Jane, I still can't believe it," she whispered, her voice a thrilled murmur. "Ridley, confessing like that caught red-handed with the will in his suitcase. You were magnificent, but is it really over? I feel there's more to come. Don't you?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled, though her expression remained as calm as a still pond. "A confession, Dolly, is like a door," she said softly. "It opens to the truth, but sometimes there are rooms beyond. Mr. Ridley has told us much, but the heart of this matter lies in why he acted and who else may have pulled the strings." The library was less crowded now, but no less charged. Clara Hargreaves stood by the marble fireplace, her angular frame taut, her black morning dress accentuating the severity of her features. Her dark eyes, usually so commanding, held a flicker of unease, as if she sensed the ground shifting beneath her carefully laid plans. Roland Hargreaves sat near a window, his handsome face pale but composed, his tailored suit a defiant nod to his fading charm. He swirled a glass of brandy, his earlier bravado replaced by a wary silence. Beatrice Hargreaves, fragile as ever, occupied a sofa, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, no longer clutching her sketchbook, but still radiating a quiet fear. Mr. Percival Thorne, his walrus moustache drooping with the weight of his ruined reputation, stood by the mahogany table, his hands fidgeting with a pen as if seeking refuge in routine. Inspector Craddock, his weathered face set in a frown, leaned against a bookcase, his notebook open but untouched, his eyes fixed on Miss Marple with a mix of grudging respect and lingering suspicion. Ernest Ridley was absent, now in custody, at the St. Albans police station, but his confession hung over the room like a storm cloud, its implications still rippling through the family. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice gruff but tempered by the morning's revelations. "Miss Marple, I'll give you credit your stunt yesterday flushed Ridley out. We've got the will, safe and sound, from that suitcase of his. False bottom, just as he said, with Mrs. Hargreaves' seal intact. But I'm not convinced this is done. Ridley's story about acting alone, using Roland's name without his knowledge, it's too neat. I want to hear what you make of it." Miss Marple rose, her slight figure commanding the room's attention with an authority that belied her unassuming air. She moved to the centre, her steps deliberate, her eyes sweeping over each face with the quiet precision of a seamstress threading a needle. "A confession," she began, her voice clear and steady, is a beginning, not an end. Mr. Ridley has admitted to stealing the will, climbing through Mr. Thorne's office window to take it from the safe, and hiding it in his suitcase, for a deal with a man in London. But we must ask why a clerk, diligent if nervous, would risk his livelihood for such a scheme, and whether he truly acted alone. Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Miss Marple, Ridley's motives are clear greed, plain and simple. He saw a chance to profit from my aunt's estate and took it. His gold watch, his telegrams to London, they prove it. Why complicate matters with speculation? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, unruffled by Clara's impatience. Greed, Miss Hargreaves, is a powerful force, but it rarely works alone. Let us retrace the threads that led us here, for they may reveal more than Mr. Ridley's confession. The will, favouring Miss Beatrice, was a spark that ignited ambitions and fears. You, Miss Hargreaves, have studied the estate's ledgers, dreaming of its potential under your control. Your ambition is no secret, nor is your willingness to contest the will. Clara's eyes flashed, her posture stiffening. My ambition is for the estate's good, Miss Marple. Beatrice is unfit to manage it, as my aunt should have seen. I've done nothing but protect our legacy. My alibi for the night the will vanished is ironclad bridge at Mrs. Langley's with the vicar as witness. You cannot suspect me. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze steady. Your alibi is indeed solid, Miss Hargreaves, and I do not accuse you of theft. But ambition can cast a long shadow, influencing others, even unwittingly. Let us turn to Mr. Rowland Hargreaves, whose debts have been the talk of St. Mary Mead. Rowland's smile was tight, his brandy glass pausing in mid-air. Miss Marple, you're relentless. My debts are no mystery, but Ridley's confession clears me. He used my name without my knowledge, the scoundrel. I was at a card game in St. Albans that night, my friends will swear to it. I had no part in his scheme. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, leaned forward. A card game, Rowland, with creditors chasing you. And that urgent letter from London, the suitcase at the station, the village, says you're planning to bolt. Rowland's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. The village loves its dramas, Mrs. Bantry. The letter was from a friend, the suitcase a whim. I'm no saint, but I'm no thief. Ridley's the villain here, not me. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained gentle. Your debts, Mr. Hargreaves, made you vulnerably fact Mr. Ridley knew from your evenings at the Red Lion. He used your name. Yes, but I wonder if he knew more than he admitted. Your creditor in London, the man he contacted, did you ever meet him? Perhaps unaware of his dealings with Ridley. Rowland's face paled, his fingers tightening on the glass. I've met plenty of men in London, Miss Marple, but none about the will. If Ridley dragged me into this, he's lying to save his skin. Miss Marple turned to Beatrice, whose fragile frame seemed to shrink under the room's scrutiny. Miss Beatrice, you have been the quiet heart of this storm. Your fear has kept you silent, but your eyes have seen much. You saw Mr. Ridley with a suitcase near the church, speaking to a stranger. You heard footsteps in the hall, and your sketch captured a shadow in the alley. Tell us, my dear, is there anything else you've held back, perhaps out of loyalty or fear? Beatrice's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. I've told you everything, Miss Marple. The stranger. He was tall, in a dark coat, but I didn't see his face. I was afraid to say more, afraid of Clara, of Rowland, of what it all meant. I just wanted it to end. Clara's voice was icy, her patience fraying. "Beatrice, your dithering has caused enough trouble. If you saw this man, why didn't you speak sooner? Your silence has let Ridley's scheme fester." Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture calming the room's rising tension. "Fear, Miss Hargreaves, is a heavy burden, and Miss Beatrice has carried it bravely. Let us turn to Mr. Thorne, whose trust in his clerk has been so sorely tested. Mr. Thorne, you mentioned a ledger with Mrs. Hargreaves' initials, detailing the estate's accounts. Did Mr. Ridley have access to it?" Thorne's mustache quivered, his voice heavy with regret. "He did, Miss Marple, under my supervision. The ledger records, rents, investments, nothing about the will itself. Ridley was diligent, never gave me cause to doubt him until now. I'm ruined, utterly ruined." Miss Marple's smile was sympathetic, but her mind was racing. A ledger, Mr. Thorne, is a map of motives. Ridley's access gave him knowledge, not just of the estate, but of those who coveted it. Let us consider his confession. He climbed the drainpipe, entered through the window, and took the will, intending to sell it to a man in London who knew of Mr. Rowland's debts. But why now? Why this will, and why alone? Craddock, his patience wearing thin, stepped forward. Miss Marple, Ridley's motive was money plain as day. His watch, his telegrams, that suitcase packed with papers, they all point to greed. He's in custody, the will's recovered. What more is there? Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice soft but relentless. There is always more, Inspector, when human nature is involved. Ridley's confession is true, but incomplete. He was not alone, not in intent, though perhaps in action. Let me tell you a story of a clerk who saw an opportunity in a divided family. A clerk who knew Miss Clara's ambition, Mr. Rowland's desperation, and Miss Beatrice's vulnerability. A clerk who had once been dismissed in London for irregularities, a fact I learned from a friend in the city. Thorne's eyes widened, his pen dropping to the table. Dismissed. Ridley never told me. He came with references forged, I suppose. Miss Marple nodded, her voice calm. Forged, but convincing. Ridley came to St. Mary Mead, a man with a past and a plan. He saw the will, knew its contents, and saw a chance to profit. But he needed a partner, or at least a scapegoat. Mr. Rowland's debts were his lever, and the creditor in London whose name Ridley has not yet given was his buyer. Ridley climbed the drain pipe, as I said, but I believe he acted under pressure, not just opportunity. Rowland's voice was sharp, his composure cracking. Pressure? From whom? You're not suggesting I put him up to it? I told you I knew nothing. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Rowland, her smile faint. Not you, Mr. Hargreaves, though. Your debts made you a convenient pawn. The pressure came from the man in London, a figure we've yet to name. Ridley's telegrams, his gold watch, his nervous pacing, these suggest a man caught in a trap, not a mastermind. Inspector, have you searched Ridley's notebook, the one Mrs. Pratt mentioned? Craddock blinked, caught off guard. Notebook. He didn't mention one. We've got his suitcase, the will, some letters, but no notebook. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her voice soft. Then you must look again, Inspector. Ridley's notebook, full of numbers and initials, is the key to his contacts. I suspect it holds the name of the man in London, and perhaps a clue to his motives. Miss Beatrice saw Ridley with a stranger near the church, a tall man in a dark coat. That man, I believe, is the true architect of this scheme. Beatrice's voice, small but clear, broke the silence. I think I saw the notebook, Miss Marple, in Ridley's room when I visited Mrs. Pratt to borrow a book. It was on his desk, leather-bound, with a lock. I didn't touch it, but it looked important. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands, her excitement spilling over. Jane, you're a genius. That notebook will crack this wide open. Ridley's been playing us all, hasn't he? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Not playing Dolly, but played. Ridley is a thief, but a small one, caught in a larger game. Inspector, I suggest you retrieve that notebook at once. It may tell us who stood to gain from the will's disappearance, and who knew enough to use Ridley as their tool. Craddock, his skepticism giving way to action, nodded. I'll send my men to Mrs. Pratt's now. If that notebook's there, we'll find it. But Miss Marple, you're saying Ridley was coerced. By whom? Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. That, Inspector, is what the notebook will tell us. For now, let us consider the family. Miss Clara, your ambition drove you to study the estate's ledgers. But you did not need to steal the will you planned to contest it legally, Mr. Rowland. Your debts made you a target, but your alibi holds, and your ignorance of Ridley's scheme seems genuine. Miss Beatrice, your fear kept you silent, but your observations, your sketches, your glimpses of Ridley have brought us to this moment. Clara's voice was cold, but her hands trembled. This is all very theatrical, Miss Marple, but Ridley confessed. The will is found. Why drag us through this again? Miss Marple's eyes met Clara's, steady and unyielding. Because, Miss Hargreaves, the will's return does not erase the motives that led to its theft. Someone knew Ridley's past, his weaknesses, and used them. That someone is still at large, and until we know their name, the estate and Miss Beatrice are not safe. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. Not safe, but the will's back. I thought it was over. Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but reassuring. It is nearly over, my dear. Your courage has brought us this far, and we will see it through. Craddock, now fully engaged, closed his notebook with a snap. I'm off to get that notebook, Miss Marple, but I warn you, if this is another wild goose chase, I'll not be pleased. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, disarming. No geese, Inspector, only truth. You'll find the notebook, and with it, the final piece of our puzzle. As Craddock left, the room fell silent, the weight of Miss Marple's words settling over the family. Clara's eyes were hard, but her hands betrayed her nerves, twisting a handkerchief into knots. Rowland stared out the window, his brandy untouched, his face a mask of unease. Beatrice, though trembling, sat straighter, as if Miss Marple's faith had kindled a spark of resolve. Mrs. Bantry grabbed Miss Marple's arm, her voice a delighted squeal. Jane, you've done it again. Ridley's just the beginning, isn't he? That man in London, who do you think he is? One of Rowland's creditors, or someone else entirely? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice soft. Someone else, Dolly, with knowledge and ambition to match Clara's, but less scruple. The notebook will tell us, and when it does, the shadows will lift. As they left the hall, the sunlight warmed the gravel drive, and the roses, though faded, seemed to nod in approval. The will was found, Ridley's confession secured, but Miss Marple knew the mystery was not yet complete. The man in London, the notebook's secrets, the motives that lingered in the hall's shadows, these were the final threads, and she was determined to weave them into the light. Chapter 12. The Restoration. The October afternoon bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze. the last warmth of autumn lingering in the air as if reluctant to yield to winter's chill. The village, with its thatched cottages and winding lanes, seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The shadow of Eleanor Hargreaves' missing will finally lifting. At Hargreaves Hall, the rose gardens, though faded, stood as a quiet testament to the estate's enduring legacy. Their petals scattered across the gravel paths like fragments of a story now complete. Inside the hall's drawing room, Miss Jane Marple sat in a chintz-covered armchair, her black silk reticule resting on her lap, her pale blue eyes serene but ever watchful. The mystery had been unravelled, the will restored, but the ripples of human frailty still stirred the air, and Miss Marple knew that closure required more than the return of a document. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, seated beside her, was a whirlwind of delight, her tweed skirt rustling as she leaned forward, her voice bubbling with the thrill of victory. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," she exclaimed, her teacup clattering in its saucer. "Ridley caught, the will found, and that notebook, leading Craddock to the man in London. It's like something out of a novel. I can't wait to tell the village how you pieced it all together. But what happens now? The family is still a powder keg, isn't it?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, her hands folded neatly over her reticule. "A mystery, Dolly, is like a garden," she said softly. "You clear the weeds, but the soil remains, rich with possibilities for good or ill. The will's restoration is a beginning, not an end, and we must see how the Hargreaves tend their legacy." The drawing room, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished mahogany, was less tense than the library had been during yesterday's confrontation. But an undercurrent of unease persisted. Beatrice Hargreaves, now the confirmed heir to the estate, sat by a window, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her delicate hands clasped in her lap. Her grey dress, though simple, seemed to carry a new weight, as if she was slowly accepting the mantle thrust upon her. Clara Hargreaves stood near the fireplace, her angular frame softened slightly by a charcoal shawl, her dark eyes no longer blazing with command but tempered by a reluctant humility. Roland Hargreaves was absent, having left for London that morning, his departure noted by the village with a mix of relief and speculation. Mr. Percival Thorne, his walrus moustache drooping with the remnants of his disgrace, had declined to attend, citing urgent business at his office, though Miss Marple suspected he was licking his wounds in private. Inspector Craddock, however, was present, his weathered face less stern than usual, his notebook tucked away as he sipped tea with the air of a man who had, grudgingly, accepted Miss Marple's triumph. The will, retrieved from Ridley's suitcase and verified by Thorne's trembling hands, lay on a rosewood table, its wax seal unbroken, a silent symbol of the estate's future. Craddock set his teacup down, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "Miss Marple, I'll say it, plain you've done what my men couldn't. Ridley's in custody, and that notebook you insisted on led us to a solicitor in London, a shady sort named Carver, who was pulling Ridley's strings. He'd heard of Roland's debts through a mutual contact and saw a chance to manipulate the estate sale. Ridley was his pawn, promised a cut for delivering the will. We've got Carver now, and the case is airtight. But how you saw it all, I'll never know." Miss Marple's laugh was soft, almost musical, disarming the room's lingering tension. "Dear Inspector, I saw only what people showed me: their fears, their ambitions, their silences. Mr. Ridley's gold watch, his telegrams, his nervous pacing, these were signs of a man trapped, not a mastermind. Miss Beatrice's sketches, her glimpse of Ridley with a stranger, pointed to a larger scheme. The notebook, with its coded initials, was merely the final stitch in the pattern. Beatrice's voice, small but clear, broke the silence. "Miss Marple, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was so afraid of Clara, of Roland, of the estate. But you believed me, even when I couldn't speak. The will, it's mine now, isn't it? I don't know if I'm ready." Miss Marple's smile was maternal, her gaze steady. "You are ready, my dear, because you see the truth, not just in your drawings, but in people. Your aunt chose you for a reason, and you'll grow into her trust. The estate is yours, but it need not be a burden alone." Clara's voice, quieter than usual, cut through the room, her tone stripped of its former sharpness. "Beatrice, I owe you an apology," she said, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I thought you weak, unfit for the hall. I was wrong. My ambition blinded me to your strength and to Aunt Eleanor's wisdom. I'll help you, if you'll have me not to control, but to guide." Beatrice's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Clara, you'd stay? After everything?" Clara's smile was faint, almost rueful. "The hall is my home, too. Beatrice, I've no wish to fight you. Let me manage the accounts, the tenants' things I know well. You can paint, dream, make this place live again. We'll do it together." Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands, her delight spilling over. "Clara, that's splendid. I knew there was a heart under all that steel. Jane, isn't this perfect?" Beatrice and Clara, side by side. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her mind was still sifting through the day's nuances. "It is a beginning, Dolly, and a promising one. Miss Hargreaves, your offer is generous, and I believe Miss Beatrice will find it a comfort. But what of Mr. Roland? His absence today speaks volumes." Craddock snorted, his voice dry. "Roland's bolted to London, as the village predicted. Left a note for Beatrice, saying he's off to settle his affairs. My men are keeping an eye on him. But he's not a suspect his alibi held, and Ridley's confession cleared him. Still, he's a loose cannon, if you ask me." Beatrice's voice was soft, tinged with sadness. "Roland wrote to me, Miss Marple. He said he's ashamed of his debts, of letting Aunt Eleanor down. He's going to pay what he owes, even if it takes years. I hope he finds peace." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze distant. "Shame, my dear, can be a powerful spur. Mr. Roland's debts drove him to the edge, but Ridley's scheme pushed him further than he knew. His departure is wise. It gives you and Miss Clara space to rebuild." Clara's eyes met Miss Marple's, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Roland's always been his own worst enemy," she said. "But Beatrice is right, he's not cruel, only weak. Let him go, and let us focus on the hall." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her mind cataloguing the family's shifting dynamics. Clara's humility, Beatrice's resolve. Roland's retreat, these were the fruits of the mystery's resolution, but they were fragile, like seedlings in a storm. "The hall will thrive under your care," she said, "but legacies, like gardens, need tending. Miss Beatrice, what do you wish for the estate?" Beatrice hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap, then straightened, her voice gaining strength. "I want to honor Aunt Eleanor," she said. "The hall should be a place of beauty, not just wealth. I'll keep the gardens, open them to the village, maybe start a school for artists. Clara can handle the business, and I'll learn to lead in my way." Mrs. Bantry's eyes shone, her voice a delighted squeal. A school for artists. Beatrice, that's divine. The village will love it. And Jane, you've made this possible. You're a miracle worker. Miss Marple's laugh was soft, disarming. No miracles, Dolly, only observation. People reveal themselves, if you listen. Miss Beatrice's fear hid her strength. Miss Clara's ambition masked her loyalty. And Mr. Rowland's charm concealed his shame. The will brought these truths to light, as wills often do. Craddock, sipping his tea, shook his head in wonder. You make it sound simple, Miss Marple, but I've seen seasoned detectives miss what you caught. That drainpipe, the green paint, Beatrice's sketch-eyed, have overlooked them all. How do you do it? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice soft. I watch, Inspector, and I remember. St. Mary Mead is a small place, but its people are no different from those in London or Paris. Greed, fear, love, they're the same everywhere. And they leave traces, like footprints in the snow. Clara, her composure restored, stepped forward, her voice steady. Miss Marple, we owe you more than thanks. You've saved the estate, and perhaps our family. If there's anything we can do, charities, a donation to the church, name it. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her hands waving the offer away. Your kindness is enough, Miss Hargreaves. But if you insist, tend to the village as you tend. To the hall, St. Mary Mead has given you much its gossip, its loyalty. Give back in kind. Beatrice's voice, now firm, echoed Clara's. We will, Miss Marple. The gardens, the school, they'll be for everyone, not just us. Aunt Eleanor would have wanted that. As the gathering drew to a close, Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry prepared to leave, the sunlight streaming through the windows as if blessing their departure. Craddock lingered, his voice low as he spoke to Miss Marple by the door. I'll be keeping an eye on Carver's contacts in London, he said. If there's more to this, I'll find it. But I hope you'll stay out of my next case, Miss Marple. You make me look bad. Miss Marple's laugh was musical, her eyes twinkling. I'll try, Inspector, but trouble has a way of finding me. Keep that notebook handy, you'll need it. Outside, the gravel drive crunched under their feet, and the roses, though spent, seemed to nod in approval. Mrs. Bantry linked arms with Miss Marple, her voice a delighted chatter as they walked to the waiting car. Jane, you're wasted. In St. Mary Mead. You should be in Scotland Yard, solving murders and conspiracies. What's next? Another mystery, I hope. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the village, its chimneys rising through the haze, its secrets now at rest. St. Mary Mead is enough. Dolly, she said, her voice soft, its people are a book, and every page holds a story. The will was only paper, but it showed the heart of those who chased it. That's mystery enough for me. Back at Mrs. Bantry's cottage, they settled into the drawing room, the fire crackling as the afternoon waned. Miss Marple took up her knitting, the pale pink shawl growing under her deft fingers, though her mind was still weaving the day's threads. Beatrice's resolve, Clara's redemption, Rowland's exile, these were the legacy of the Hargreaves affair, as much as the will itself. Ridley's confession, Carver's arrest, the notebook's secrets, they were the mechanics of the mystery. But its heart lay in the human frailties that drove them. Mrs. Bantry, sipping tea, was still buzzing with excitement. Jane, I'll never forget yesterday Ridley breaking down Beatrice's courage, you standing there like a judge. Do you think Beatrice will manage the hall? And Clara will, she really change? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. Beatrice will manage Dolly because she must. Her fear was her cage, but she stepped out of it. Clara's change is genuine, though ambition never sleeps, will drive her to help, not hinder. As for Roland, his path is his own, but shame may yet make a man of him. Mrs. Bantry sighed, her eyes dreamy. It's like a play, isn't it? All the parts fitting together, thanks to you. What did you see first, Jane? What was the clue that started it? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic, her gaze distant. It was Beatrice's fear, Dolly, and Ridley's watch to small things, but they spoke of a larger truth. A clerk with sudden wealth, a girl with silent knowledge, these were the loose threads, and I only tugged them free. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's knitting grew, her thoughts turning to the village beyond the window. St. Mary Mead was quiet now, its gossip shifting to newer tales, but she knew its heart, its loves, its jealousies, its secrets would always yield another mystery. The Hargreaves' will was restored, the estate secured, but human nature, with its endless complexities, would never be tamed. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and unerring instinct, was ready for whatever story it told next.